Chapter 27:15. After all, this cold-looking uncle had agreed to send him to the police station, which made him feel extremely grateful. He couldn't give him anything in return, but it was only right for him to praise him. "You're tall and handsome. Many girls must like you." A woo, Chu Xiaobao played with the puppy's paws and smiled. "If only I could be as handsome as you when I grow up." Gu Jinglian, who was taking a nap, heard this and couldn't help but frown. "Uncle, are there a lot of girls who like you?" Chu Xiaobao saw that he had his eyes closed and was ignoring him, so he turned to look at him with his head tilted. This uncle is really very handsome. He was more handsome than many celebrities on TV. However, he suddenly noticed something and exclaimed in surprise. He stretched out his hand and said, "Uncle, there's a speck of dust on your eye. Xiao Bao will help you wipe it clean." Then he crawled over, stretched out his chubby little hand, and used his fingertips to wipe the mole at the corner of his eye. He actually treated the mole at the corner of Gu Jinglian's eye as a speck of dust. Gu Jinglian finally couldn't take it anymore. He reached out to grab his little hand and glared at him coldly. "Do you want to die?" Chu Xiaobao trembled in fear. He was obviously helping him wipe off the dirt. He wasn't asking for death. He immediately explained weakly, "I saw something dirty on your face." The veins on Gu Jinglian's eyebrows twitched. He said eerily, "If you make any more noise, I'll throw you out of the car." Chu Xiaobao immediately retracted his little hand. He was so frightened that he sat up straight and looked straight ahead. Gu Jinglian crossed his arms in satisfaction. He really didn't like dealing with children. However, it seemed to be ungentlemanly to kick a child out of the car in the wilderness. It was within his patience to give him a ride. Half an hour later, the car drove onto the outer ring of the highway. On Duga, the night view of the bustling city could be seen at a glance. Although it was already late at night, it was also the time when the city was truly bustling. If it had been Yen City, it would have been pitch black by now. Chu Xiaobao leaned against the window and looked at the charming neon lights of the city. His eyes widened in amazement. Countless lights were lit up. From afar, it looked like a vast starry sky, dotted with stars. Countless neon lights were flowing with brilliant colors. It was unbelievably beautiful. Chu Xiaobao, who grew up in the countryside, was also mesmerized by the bustling scenery. A surprised expression appeared on his face. "Wow, is there such a tall building in the county? Is that flashing light a lamp? I've never seen such a beautiful lamp. So beautiful, so beautiful." The little fellow's vocabulary was limited. After pondering for a long time, he could only think of words like beautiful and beautiful to describe her. Gu Jinglian instructed the driver, "After we get off the highway, send this guy to the police station." "Yes." Just as the boy was engrossed in the food, his stomach suddenly started acting up again, and he kept singing, "Coo, coo." He gently rubbed his deflated belly and encouraged himself. "Hang in there for a little while. There will be food soon." Gu, what answered him was such a desolate voice. The road on Duga seemed extremely long and far in his hunger. Chapter 27:16. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore. He mustered up his courage and suddenly tugged at Gu Jinglian's sleeve, trying to sound him out. "Uncle!" Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows and gave him a sidelong glance. "Yes, I'm hungry." Chu Xiaobao's meaning behind his words was, "Can you take me to fill my stomach?" Gu Jinglian seemed a little unromantic and asked back, "So, is there anything to eat?" "No." Chu Xiaobao didn't give up and mustered up his courage to ask again. "I'm so hungry. I haven't had a full meal for the whole day. So, Uncle, can you take me to fill my stomach?" Gu Jinglian's gaze was cold. "I'm warning you. Gulp my patience. Gulp My patience is limited. Immediately, gulp, after I send you to the police station, gulp. Every time Gu Jinglian finished his sentence, he was interrupted by the rumbling of Chu Xiaobao's stomach. He saw the little guy staring at him with pitiful eyes. His gaze was miserable, and he wanted to say something. He gritted his teeth and glared at him fiercely for a long time. KFC was open 24 hours a day. 12:30 a.m. Business dropped sharply. The waiter was mopping the floor when he suddenly heard the sound of the door closing. Following that, he heard a lot of people walking in. The waiter looked up in confusion and was shocked by the spectacular scene in front of him. At the door, a handsome man in a black trench coat with both hands in his trouser pockets pushed open the door and walked in. Beside him was a little guy rubbing his flat stomach and following closely behind. Behind the two of them, a group of bodyguards dressed in black walked in. Every one of them was serious and solemn. Their cold eyes looked around, and their aura was terrifying. The waiter was dumbfounded on the spot. What was this? Were they from the Black She Gang? However, I've never seen anyone from the Black Star Gang step into a Western fast food restaurant like KFC. The two cashiers, who were chatting idly in front of the counter, were also stunned. They trembled as they looked at the imposing group walking towards the counter. Gu Jinglian walked to the counter expressionlessly. Xiao Bao, who was beside him, stood on his tiptoes and stretched out his hands to lie on the counter. His eyes were sparkling, like a little mouse that had fallen into a rice bowl. Hi, hello. The cashier's teeth were chattering as she struggled to say those words. Gu Jinglian's cold gaze swept over. His aura was condescending as he looked down on everyone. The cashier was so scared that her legs turned to jelly. Gu Jinglian had never been to a place like this before. However, along the way, this was the only fast food restaurant that was still open so late. Although the man in front of her was shockingly handsome, she was still deeply intimidated by the terrifying aura that he exuded. Baby Chu, on the other hand, did not notice the strange scene as he curiously looked up at the menu. Unable to recognize a few words, he asked curiously, "Pretty sister, are there any steamed buns here?" "No." "Then, are there any soup noodles?" "No." "Fried rice?" "Egg fried rice." "No." Gu Jinglian asked impatiently, "Then what do we have here?" The cashier's mouth was wide open in shock. It was big enough to swallow 3 eggs. Chapter 27:17. Forgive her for not seeing the world. There was actually someone in this world who had never eaten KFC before. There are hamburgers, grilled wings, fries, egg tarts, and cola. They are all simple Western dishes. After the cashier introduced the dishes with difficulty, her back was covered in cold sweat. "Xiao," Bao asked curiously, "what's a hamburger?" "A hamburger is a hamburger." "What's an egg tart?" "Is it delicious?" Xiao Bao imagined a tower made of countless eggs, an egg tower. This was the first time he had stepped into such a luxurious restaurant. The dishes on the menu looked delicious, but he had never seen any of them before. The cashier was embarrassed again. "It's quite delicious." "Oh," Xiao Bao excitedly pulled Gu Jinglian's sleeve. Uncle, this beautiful sister said that the egg tarts are delicious. Can I have an egg tart?" Gu Jinglian's lips twitched. He took the menu and pointed at the children's set meal, 2 sets. One. The total is 78 yuan. Cash or Alipay? As soon as the cashier finished speaking, a man in black suddenly strode over, took out his wallet, took out a bill from a stack of money, and handed it to the cashier. The cashier wished she could kneel on the ground to collect the money. After giving him the change, while trembling with fear, Gu Jinglian walked to a booth. Baby Chu also skipped over, and the little white puppy followed with its tongue hanging out. After a while, The waiter served the set meal. The freshly made hamburger was soft and tempting. There were freshly squeezed fries and cola with sparkling water. Everything was extremely novel in Xiao Bao's eyes. He held the hamburger in his hands as if he was holding a tribute and carefully tore open the wrapper. The aroma hit him, and he almost couldn't care less about being reserved and took a bite. It was delicious. Xiao Bao felt that the whole world was shining. The amazing taste almost sent him to the splendid clouds. This was probably the best thing he had ever eaten. 2 pieces of bread with meat. Why is it called a hamburger? That's weird. As he ate, his eyes greedily scanned the plate. He grabbed another French fry and put it into his mouth, eating it with relish. Gu Jinglian rested his chin on his hand lazily and looked at the night view outside the window. His slender fingers tapped lightly on the table. At the side, one of the subordinates suddenly discovered something very surprising. "President Gu, this child looks a lot like you." Gu Jinglian couldn't help but come back to his senses. He followed the line of sight and glanced at Xiao Bao, only to see him taking big bites of hamburgers, stuffing his mouth until it was bulging. However, under the bright light, his delicate little face leaped into his eyes. Earlier in the car, the lights were dim, so she didn't see his face clearly. Now that his subordinate had mentioned it, he took a closer look. Indeed, the eyebrows and eyes were somewhat similar. Her nose and mouth are alike too. She looks just like you when you were young. The subordinate had been by his side since he was young, so he had a deep memory of Gu Jinglian's appearance when he was young. Seeing that Gu Jinglian was indifferent, the subordinate sighed again. President Gu was really cute when he was young. His face was chubby, his eyes were big, and the whites were distinct. "I don't need your opinion." Gu Jinglian interrupted him. Chapter 27:18. The man immediately broke out in a cold sweat and kept quiet. Yes. However, Gu Jinglian took the man's words to heart. He began to look at the child seriously. It was rare for him to look him in the eye. Indeed, as his subordinate had said, this child's eyebrows were very similar to his. Even if they walked out, it would be natural for people to think that they were father and son. What a strange fate. Gu Jinglian asked with rare patience, "What's your name?" Xiao Bao Chu looked up. His mouth was full as he mumbled, "My name is Xiao Bao Chu. I can't hear you clearly." Xiao Bao Chu immediately hugged the cola and took a big gulp. He wiped his mouth and said with a smile, "My name is Xiao Bao Chu." The Chu in Xiao Bao Chu, the Xiao in Xiao Bao Chu, and the Bao in Chu Xiao Bao Chu. Gu Jinglian's face darkened. What was this? His naive and childish words made the people behind him burst into laughter. What a cute little guy. As Xiao Bao Chu spoke, he suddenly realized that he had spilled the beans. He quickly covered his mouth and looked scared like a frightened deer. Gu Jinglian couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong now?" Xiao Bao Chu put his hand down. He looked hesitant and a little annoyed. After thinking about it, he said innocently, "Mom said that I can't tell outsiders my name." Gu Jinglian was speechless. Xiao Bao Chu suddenly changed the topic and smiled. "But, Uncle, you're so good to me. You sent me home and brought me to eat good food. So it doesn't matter if I tell Uncle my name. I didn't say that I'll send you home." Gu Jinglian emphasized, "I only said that I'll send you to the police station. Send me to the police station, and I'll be able to go home." Xiao Bao Chu smiled. "Uncle, you're a good person. A good person will have a peaceful life." Gu Jinglian frowned. If he were to get married in the future, he would definitely not give birth to such a foolish son. The bodyguard beside him couldn't help but tease him. He said half-jokingly, "Why are you alone? Where is your home?" "My family lives in..." Chu Xiao Bao opened his mouth, but there was a bit of vigilance in his eyes. Then he said carefully, "My family lives in Dingcheng." "Yen City?" His subordinates looked at each other. They had never heard of this city before. Where is Yen City? In any case, it's a very far place. At this point, the little guy couldn't help but feel a little dejected. He placed the half-eaten hamburger on his plate with a heavy expression. Mom must be worried sick. Gu Jinglian frowned. Indeed, it was very suspicious for a child to appear in such a remote area. "Then why were you there?" Chu Xiaobao sighed heavily. "It's a long story, but didn't Uncle tell me to be quiet? I'd better not say anything." Gu Jinglian. Now he knew how to be quiet. He had been chattering along the way. How could he not know how to be quiet? This guy was obviously wary of him and didn't want to talk about it. He didn't expect him to be so vigilant at such a young age. Gu Jinglian watched him eat quietly. Xu Xiaobao was like a little hamster as he ate the two children's meals clean. Finally, he finished with a satisfied burp. Burp. Chapter 27:19. Gu Jinglian frowned. After eating his fill, Xu Bao slumped on the chair, rubbing his round belly and licking the salad dressing on his lips. He was extremely satisfied. Gu Jinglian asked, "Are you full?" "Yeah, I'm full," Xiao Bao said contentedly. When the waiter saw that the little guy had finished eating, he immediately walked over respectfully and presented two cartoon dolls. "Little kid, these are the dolls that came with the children's package. Here, for you." "Eh? For me? Is it free?" The waiter broke out in cold sweat. "No, this is a gift." Xiao Bao held the two dolls in his arms as if they were priceless treasures. One was a Doraemon doll, and the other was a cartoon figurine with exquisite workmanship. "Thank you, Auntie." He smiled sweetly to express his gratitude. After the waiter left, Xiao Bao handed the toys to Gu Jinglian as if he was presenting a treasure. "Here, Uncle, I'll give you a toy." "No, this toy is very cute." Xiao Bao looked at him with some confusion. A child's world was simple after all. He felt that such a cute toy could actually make him unmoved. He couldn't help but feel a little helpless and said reluctantly, "Since Uncle doesn't like it, then I'll have to accept it." What a sly brat. Gu Jinglian got up. "Let's go. I'll send you to the police station." "Okay." Xiao Bao hugged the toys and jumped off the chair with his round belly. However, he was annoyed to find that he seemed to be too full and couldn't walk properly. In addition, he had walked for the whole day, and his feet were badly bruised. Earlier, he had been thinking about the delicious food, so he didn't have any scruples. Now that he was full, the pain in his feet was even more obvious. Gu Jinglian had just turned around when he felt a heavy weight on his thigh. He looked down coldly and saw Xiao Bao hugging his thigh. He said eagerly, "Uncle, hug." The bodyguards behind him were dumbfounded. This child was really daring. He actually asked for a hug from the boss. "Can't you walk on your own?" Gu Jinglian ignored him. Chu Xiaobao said pitifully, "I'm so full, I can't walk anymore." However, he said the same words of wisdom again. "Uncle is so gentle. Give me a hug. Good people will have a peaceful life." Gu Jinglian looked at him gloomily. Just when everyone thought that his patience had reached its limit and he was about to lose his temper, he leaned over slightly and held him in his arms with one hand. Everyone was dumbfounded. President Gu, she actually lowered her status and carried this child. Oh my God! After all, Mr. Gu had never been patient with children. Chu Xiaobao was elated. She gently kissed his cheek and said shyly, "Uncle is the best." Gu Jinglian, he really despised this guy for kissing him. Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao into the car. When the little white puppy was about to climb into the back seat, he kicked it away coldly and said, "Get lost." When Chu Xiaobao saw this, she let out an and said hurriedly, "Uncle, why are you so violent? This is my good friend. You can't bully her like this." Gu Jinglian's expression darkened. "Good friend?" Chu Xiaobao ignored his dark expression and clapped her hands at the little white puppy. She called out, "Little White, come quickly. Come into my arms." The little white puppy looked at Gu Jinglian fearfully and nimbly climbed into the car, leaving a dusty paw print on the black leather seat. Chapter 27:20. Baby Chu looked up and saw the man's gloomy gaze. He then followed the man's gaze to the messy paw prints on the leather seat. His brain went boom, and he immediately realized that Xiao Bai seemed to have gotten into a big mess. Hence, he hurriedly rolled up his sleeves and wiped away the dusty paw prints on the seat under Gu Jinglian's cold gaze. However, no matter how hard he wiped, those dusty paw prints could not be wiped off in a short period of time. This was because the puppy's paws secreted grease. Hence, such paw prints needed to be cleaned professionally. Chu Xiaobao furrowed his eyebrows guiltily. "Uncle, I'm sorry, okay? But Little White definitely didn't do it on purpose. You're a big man with an indomitable spirit. You wouldn't be angry with a puppy, right? In other words, if he were to be calculative with a beast, he would not be a man. Was he trying to provoke him? Kid, I don't have the patience. I'm not called Little White. I'm called Xiaobao." Chu Xiaobao corrected him righteously. Gu Jinglian finally lost his patience and slammed his fist on the door frame. Chu Xiaobao was instantly shocked. He looked at Gu Jinglian's extremely gloomy face in horror and immediately shut up. He carefully shrank his body into a corner and lowered his head as if he could reduce his presence by doing so. Suddenly, he said weakly, "You can call me Little White too. Don't be angry." This uncle was handsome, but his temper did not seem to be very good. Gu Jinglian did not intend to lower himself to his level. Anyway, this kid was going to get lost soon. He got into the car and closed the door. Seeing him get into the car, Chu Xiaobao became even more afraid. He leaned against the window on the other side and shrank back again. Gu Jinglian glanced at him coldly and ignored him. "Drive." "CEO Gu, are we going to the police station directly?" the driver asked with trepidation. From the rearview mirror, Gu Jinglian glanced at him coldly and raised his eyebrows. "You know the answer?" The driver broke out in cold sweat again. It was so cold. Perhaps it was because Gu Jinglian was in the car, but he felt that the temperature was even colder than outside the window. He immediately turned on the heater. Along the way, Chu Xiaobao was probably full and knew his place. He was no longer chattering like before and had endless things to say. He just quietly hugged the little dog. After eating, he felt sleepy and actually fell asleep in a daze. She fell into a deep sleep. Her body tilted, and she fell into his arms. Gu Jinglian only felt a weight on his leg. When he opened his eyes, he saw that the little fellow's head was naturally resting on his leg. She was resting with a clear conscience. Children have big hearts. No ordinary person would dare to rest their head on his thigh. Gu Jinglian stretched out his hand and was about to move his heavy head away when Chu Xiaobao mumbled something softly. For a moment, he could not hear clearly what he was mumbling. Perhaps he had fallen asleep and was talking in his sleep. He paused for a moment and seemed to be in a daze. From his angle, Chu Xiaobao's handsome side profile was full of childishness. His eyes were closed, and his little face was especially quiet. However, his body was slightly curled up as if he did not feel safe. His heart inexplicably softened. Chapter 27:21. Seeing the little boy shrink his shoulders, he raised his eyebrows, took a coat from the side, and covered him with it. The bodyguard sitting in the front passenger seat heard the movement in the back seat and could not help but come back to his senses. However, he saw such a rare and precious side of Gu Jinglian. He was extremely tender and could not help but be stunned. Gu Jinglian sensed that he was being sized up. He looked up, but his eyes were cold and sharp in an instant. "What's wrong?" No, nothing." The bodyguard immediately retracted his gaze and sat up straight. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "Turn off the sound system." "Yes." The chauffeur immediately reached out to turn off the sound system. The car sped along, but the car was extremely quiet. Xiao Bao lay on his lap at ease and had an incomparably peaceful dream. In the dream, a tall man gently held his hand. When he looked up, even though his facial features could not be seen clearly, his imposing figure made him feel extremely at ease. The man held his little hand and walked on the empty and endless field. The blue sky was blue and white clouds were white, and the sun was shining brightly. "Daddy," he could not help but call out emotionally. Gu Jinglian closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. He heard a whisper like a mosquito. Even though it was a little slurred, he could still recognize that the little guy seemed to be calling someone's name. He opened his eyes and looked at him suspiciously. He bent down to listen, but Xiao Bao did not move anymore. "President Gu, we're here," the chauffeur said. Gu Jinglian looked up and saw that they had already arrived at the police station. The car stopped steadily at the entrance of the police station. The bodyguard immediately got out of the car and opened the door of the back seat. He saw Xiao Bao lying in Gu Jinglian's arms, sleeping peacefully. "President Gu, shall I carry him in?" Gu Jinglian looked down at the little guy. The little guy's expression was tranquil, and the corners of his lips were curled up as if he was smiling. Was he having a good dream? Seeing that he did not say anything, the bodyguard thought that he had acquiesced. He reached out to carry Xiao Bao. Just as her hand was about to reach out, Gu Jinglian said coldly, "Wait." His voice was not loud, but it was very deep, and it had a deterrent force that made people unable to look at him directly. The bodyguard looked puzzled, but he heard him say, "Can't you see that he's asleep?" The bodyguard was at a loss. She fell asleep. And then what happened? Didn't he say that he wanted to send the child to the police station? "President Gu, then do you still want to carry him inside?" He carefully probed and asked for his opinion. Gu Jinglian looked deeply at Xiao Bao and said, "Let him sleep." It was just a few words, but it was somewhat unexpected. The bodyguard was flustered. "Then, tonight, where should we settle him?" "Gu Mansion." "Yes." The bodyguard returned to his seat. Gu Jinglian came back to his senses and realized what he had just said. He was also a little shocked. If it were in the past, no matter what the reason was, he would mercilessly kick the kid out of the car even if he was asleep at the police station. However, when he looked at the kid's peaceful sleeping face just now, he actually could not bear to disturb him. What the hell? He did not expect that the only exception he would make was for a child. When Song Enya returned home in the morning, she found out from Jiang Qiming that Song Jianjun's men had returned empty-handed because Mu Yanqing's men had taken Meng Qingxue away first, so they did not have a chance to make a move. When she heard the bad news, her body became slightly unsteady, and her heart was in a mess. Chapter 27-22. How did this happen? Song Enya was shocked and furious. She grabbed her mother's shoulder and asked, "Does this mean that Mu Yanqing is in Yen City now?" "Yes." Jiang Qiming nodded. "He hasn't returned to the capital yet. According to the news, something happened to Meng Qingxue, and she was sent to the hospital." "The hospital?" Song Enya was slightly shocked. Then her lips curled into a strange smile. Could she have had a miscarriage? We don't know about that. Let's hope that's the case. In any case, the child in her stomach can't be kept. Song Enya was slightly stunned and asked uneasily, "What if it's not a miscarriage? Since Mu Yenqing has found her, he'll bring her back. If that happens, we'll be in trouble." Indeed, if Mu Yenqing brings that be asterisk TCH back, it'll be a very troublesome matter. What should we do then? Song Enya was completely flustered. She could not help but resent those two men for being so useless and stupid. In the evening, when Song Zhenghua returned home, Song Enya immediately asked for his opinion. "Dad, how should we get rid of that little vixen Meng Qingxue?" Uncle's men were a step too late. Mu Yenqing has already taken Meng Qingxue away. He was probably the only one in the Song family who was clear-headed and rational right now. Song Zhenghua did not answer her directly. Instead, he asked sternly, "Where exactly did you go when you left the house in a hurry this morning?" Yes, Jiang Qimeng also thought of this problem. "I called you for breakfast this morning, but there was no one in the room. Where did you go so early in the morning?" When Song Enya heard this, she stammered, seemingly deliberately avoiding the topic. Song Zhenghua slammed the table and rebuked angrily, "Are you still trying to hide things from us at this point? Or did you do something ridiculous behind our backs again?" "No, Dad." Song Enya had no choice but to reveal everything that had happened this morning and her original plan. When Song Zhenghua heard this, he was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. He felt that it was unreasonable and said in exasperation, "How dare you do such a thing?" Song Enya found it hard to accept his uncontrollable anger. She said indignantly, "What else can I do? As matters stand, this is the only way I can think of. As long as the child in her womb exists, it will be the greatest threat to me." Song Zhenghua scolded, "But you can't do that. What if Mu Yenqing finds out?" So what if he finds out? Despite her stubbornness, she could not help feeling a little guilty. What you're doing will only make Mu Yenqing hate you more. The relationship between the two of you is like an abyss of suffering. If he knows that you have such a vicious method, he will definitely guard against you in the future. I think your cultivation is still too shallow. Once someone like you marries into a tiger's den, like the Mu family, you will definitely be plotted against. Even though the Mu clan's momentum was in decline, everyone in the Mu clan had profound skills. You can't win. What can I do, then? Song Enya said aggrievedly, "We can't just keep that child, can we?" Chapter 27-23. Song Zhenghua paused for a moment before continuing. Since he was willing to put down his pride and bring people to look for Meng Qingxue, you should know that this woman is not ordinary in his heart. It can be said that Meng Qingxue's status is much higher than yours. If she had some tricks up her sleeve, even if she didn't marry into the Mu family, she could still suppress you. That be asterisk TC. Song Enya gritted her teeth in anger. Then what should I do? Since Mu Yenqing wants to bring Meng Qingxue back to the capital, why don't we let her come back? Are we just going to sit back and do nothing and let Mu Yenqing bring Meng Qingxue back to nourish the baby? Song Enya was puzzled. Song Zhenghua sneered and said viciously, "There are thousands of ways to get rid of a child. Why are you in such a hurry? As long as the child isn't born, it's still in your favor." Song Enya turned her head away angrily. Song Zhenghua's tone softened a little as he sighed. "Your brother has no future in life after that accident. As for Enshi, she's still too young and insensible. In the entire Song family, I'm counting on you, Dad." Song Enya's eyes reddened. "I feel that this is the worst kind of life. Who do you think is to blame now that things have come to this?" At the mention of this, Song Zhenghua was furious. "You clearly have such a good hand, but you brought this upon yourself. Back then, I advised you to let go of Mu Yaja, but you refused to listen. Song Enya knew that she was in the wrong. In the future, listen to me. Don't be stubborn and act rashly. I won't harm you. You're still young. Don't be stupid in the future. Song Enya gritted her teeth and suddenly said, I understand. The night was dark and the wind was biting cold. In the ward of Yenching First Hospital, Chuho stood in front of the window with a cold and solemn expression. However, although he looked calm on the surface, the uneasiness in his heart was growing. She was a very calm person. Even if she encountered great danger, she would still be able to maintain her composure. However, after Xiao Bao went missing, she started to panic. However, compared to ordinary mothers, she did not show hysterical panic, nor did she fall into a state of madness and uneasiness. The worst thing was that when she was pouring water, she had a lot on her mind and accidentally spilled the water on the ground. It wasn't that she wasn't anxious, but she knew that meaningless panic was meaningless. She had to be more rational to keep a clear head. It had been 24 hours since Chu Xiaobao went missing. She didn't report the case because even she couldn't provide any clues. Without any clues, even if she started an investigation, there wouldn't be any progress. In the morning, she rushed to the police station to investigate his whereabouts. However, she found that she didn't even have a clue. How could they find him? Black Dragon Pool Village was a backward village. There were no surveillance cameras. Even on the roads, there were very few surveillance cameras, except for those that violated the rules. In addition, she didn't know anything about the car, even if she only knew the license plate. Chapter 27-24. When Chu Ho returned, Meng Qingxue had just had her blood drawn and had fallen asleep. Mu Yenching, on the other hand, had been keeping watch in the ward. This man's patience was beyond her expectations. She did not expect this man to be so responsible towards his woman. Chu Ho walked to his side and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Mu Yenching raised his head and frowned. "What do you mean? What do you plan to do with Qingxue and the child in her stomach?" Mu Yenching remained silent for a moment when Chu Ho asked this question. Suddenly, he said, "I plan to bring her back to the capital after she recovers a little." "You plan to give birth to this child?" "Yes." Chu Ho did not think much of it. "Then, do you plan to marry her?" Mu Yenching did not say anything. Chu Ho gave him a disdainful look. "Scum." Mu Yenching's face turned sullen. "What did you say?" "I said that you're a scum. If you didn't hear me clearly, I'll repeat myself." "How dare you?" Mu Yenching said coldly. "It's not up to you to judge and point fingers at me. Qingxue is a good lady. If you don't want to take responsibility, please don't ruin her. If you still love her, then as a man, you should take responsibility." Just as Chu Ho finished speaking, the person on the bed moved. The two of them immediately looked over and saw Meng Qingxue slowly opening her eyes. Her brows were tightly knitted, and she seemed to be feeling a little uncomfortable. "Qingxue." Mu Yenching immediately leaned over. "You're awake." The first thing Meng Qingxue asked when she opened her eyes was, "Where's Xiao Bao?" Chu Ho was stunned. Meng Qingxue woke up and opened her eyes. When she saw Chu Ho standing by the bed, she immediately sat up. "Chu Ho, have you found Xiao Bao?" She was so focused on Xiao Bao that she ignored Mu Yenching. Chu Ho shook his head. "There are no clues." "Ah." Meng Qingxue could not help but look disappointed. She bit her lip and said, It's all my fault. This has nothing to do with you." Chu Ho had no intention of blaming her. "Don't overthink it. Qingxue, let me ask you, do you have any clues about the two men who took Xiao Bao away that day?" He went straight to the point. Meng Qingxue's eyes were filled with confusion when she heard that. She rubbed her temples. She had just woken up and had a splitting headache, but even so, she still forced herself to recall everything that had happened that night. I remember their faces. Go ahead. This was also one of the clues. 2 men, 1 man, triangular eyes, flat nose, thick lips, dark skin, not very tall, only a little taller than me. 170 centimeters. Yes, Meng Qingxue nodded heavily. From his accent, he seemed to be from the north. The other man also had a northern accent. His eyebrows were thick, his eyes were a little prominent, his nose was high, and his lips were thin. He gave off a fierce vibe. That day, the 2 of them were wearing black clothes. And then, Meng Qingxue thought hard again. Suddenly, she thought of something and her eyes lit up. I remember the license plate of their car. If there's a license plate, can we find them? You remember the license plate? Chuho was a little surprised. Hope finally rekindled in his heart. Chapter 27-25. Yes, although it was dark that night, the lights in the house and the license plate reflected some light. I kept chasing after them. But when I saw that I couldn't catch up, I memorized the license plate. Chuho immediately asked, "What's the license plate?" "Black A87B9L. Okay." Chuho repeated it silently and memorized it. "I'll go to the police station right away and investigate this license plate. Could it be a set of cards?" Mu Yenqing suddenly asked. Chuho said, "It's better to have a clue than not." She picked up her clothes from the clothes rack and was about to walk out of the door when Meng Qingxue rolled out of bed. "Chuho, I'll go with you." "No, you're too weak." Chuho said again, "Stay here and rest. See if you can think of other useful clues." With that, she left in a hurry. Meng Qingxue leaned back against the bed in a daze. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Mu Yenqing sitting at the side. Her face turned cold, and she turned her face away. "Qingxue," Mu Yenqing frowned, and suddenly asked, "Why did you leave just like that night?" "What else?" Meng Qingxue retorted coldly. "Since there's no hope, shouldn't I just let go? Do you still want me to be like how I was in the past, to compromise and submit to adversity? Even if there's no hope, to watch over you humbly like a fool? Then to turn a blind eye to your indifference and continue to accept you humbly, waiting in the dark for you to change your mind?" Mu Yenqing was speechless. "That night, I originally wanted to put an end to the relationship between you and me," Meng Qingxue said. "I made up my mind and packed my luggage. I called you and wanted you to make a choice. Either we get married and live together, or I leave you and return your freedom to you and me." "Call," Mu Yenqing said. "I was drunk that night and didn't receive your call." "Yes, you didn't receive my call. It was another woman who did." Meng Qingxue smiled bitterly. "She said that you were at her place and had fallen asleep because you were tired. Was I supposed to foolishly pretend that I didn't know? Then, like those concubines in ancient times, wait for you to come back from another woman's side before pampering me?" Mu Yenqing was suddenly jolted. He remembered that he was at Song Enya's place that night. Could it be that Song Enya had said something to agitate her, causing her to leave in a rage? "What did she say to you?" "I forgot. I don't want to remember it either." Meng Qingxue appeared very aloof. Mu Yenqing explained, "Nothing happened between us that night. Do you think I'll believe your one-sided story again? When did I lie? What you did is what you did, and what you didn't do is what you didn't do." Meng Qingxue smiled. "Do you dare to swear? If an oath really comes true, I can swear." Meng Qingxue. Mu Yenqing continued, "Qingxue, come back to the capital with me. Don't worry, I will take good care of you until you give birth to the child. I will take on the responsibility of a father and raise the child well. Then Meng Qingxue took a deep breath and asked calmly, "Will you take on the responsibility of a husband?" Chapter 27-26. Yes, you're willing to take on the responsibility of a father, but you won't marry me in the end, right? Meng Qingxue glared at him angrily. She could not take it anymore when he did not say a word. Say something. If you don't care about status, I can bring you back to the Mu family. However, you know that I'm engaged. I can't take you as my wife, but I can give you everything except status. A good life, food, clothes, and necessities. You can definitely shut up. Meng Qingxue widened her eyes and forced her tears back. She suddenly felt that it was ridiculous and laughed out loud. Accept status? So what you mean is that I can live by your side like a mistress and receive your love without being exposed. Meng Qingxue grabbed a pillow beside her and threw it at him fiercely. She screamed hysterically, "Mu Yanqing, why do you always say such things so confidently? A good life, glory, and wealth. You know that I don't care about these things. Qingxue, let's cut off all ties." Meng Qingxue suddenly burst into tears. "I don't want to love you anymore. I don't want to live that kind of life anymore. I don't want to see the light of day, like a pitiful worm." Mu Yanqing bit his lower lip hard. It was not that he was unwilling to marry her. It was just that he did not have Mu Yaja's boldness. Yes, he loved Qing Shui. Perhaps it was only when he lost her that he realized what kind of person she truly wanted. Meng Qingshue's name had already occupied his heart. If he could, he also wanted to marry her in a grand and glorious manner. However, the Mu family's door was not open to him. He could not marry Meng Qingxue just because he wanted to. The Mu family paid attention to family background. What kind of background did Meng Qingxue have? Just her identity as a young model was enough to hit him back with a stick. However, he really could not give up on her. "Qingxue, I promise you that I'll cut off all ties with any woman. I won't be a playboy anymore, and I won't touch other women. I will love you, only you, but I can't marry you. My family background, my identity, it's destined that you won't be able to marry into the Mu family grandly. But second uncle has already promised me. When the time comes, I'll marry you into the Mu family. Although you won't be my official wife, you'll still be my woman. Concubine." Meng Qingxue asked back. Her eyes were like a dead pool, dim and lifeless. Mu Yanqing's heart ached as he looked at her despairing expression. "Qingxue, Meng Qingxue sneered and interrupted him. "Mu Yanqing, you always have 1,000 ways to trample on me." She suddenly stared at him, gritting her teeth as she asked, "Do you have a heart? Do you know that when a person is sad, their heart will really hurt?" Her questioning made him a little irritated, and his mind was in a mess. He suddenly stood up, and his attitude became more resolute. "I'll bring you back to the capital." "What?" "I'll give you 1 night to think about it. Qingxue, you can't live without me, and I can't live without you." With that, he turned around and left the ward. Meng Qingxue stared blankly at his back view as tears rolled uncontrollably from her eyes. After all, he was that selfish. He had never really cared about her feelings. Chapter 27-27. Chu Ho took the license plate and went to the police station to investigate. Soon, she found out the whereabouts of the van. After the van left Heilongtan village, it drove from the provincial road to the Jinghan Expressway. It was 6 o'clock in the morning when it finally arrived in the capital. Then, the van drove to a remote area. The next route was from the Jinghan Expressway to Ishan City. After that, there was no further movement. Other than a few violations of the van, there were no other clues. However, such clues were valuable enough. At least the license plate was not fake, and the van matched the clues provided by Meng Qingxue. At least they knew that the van was in the vicinity of Yishan City. However, when Chuho proposed to arrest the suspect, the police officer who was working with her seemed to have some doubts. Chuho, this matter must be reported to the bureau chief. The process of arresting the suspect is very complicated because these funds have to be approved by the bureau chief before the manpower can be mobilized. The problem is that the bureau chief is on a business trip and is not in the station. Even if the proposal is handed to him, the approval process is very complicated, and it may be rejected. This will delay the process for a long time. If you are willing to pay for it yourself, then it's a different story. Pay for it myself? Yes. For example, for the manpower that will be mobilized, you will pay for it. The police station will provide the manpower, and you will pay for it. However, the clues are limited. Even if you bring a large group of people to Yishan City, you may not be able to arrest the suspect. Chuho's face stiffened. Yen City is a small county after all. The annual funding from the provincial bureau is limited. The bureau chief will not approve this proposal. Are you sure that Xiaobao is really in this van? I'm sure. Chuho seemed to be struggling. I'm also willing to pay for it. How much will it cost? The police officer pondered for a while and made an estimation. Then, he said, a conservative estimate would be 100,000. 100,000? Chuho was a little stunned. Yes. Chuho's face became even more serious. If the suspect changes his target, and we rush to Yishan City and return empty-handed, this money will be wasted. Chuho suddenly grabbed his collar and said coldly, "This has nothing to do with money. Even a few million isn't as important as a single strand of Xiaobao's hair." Chuho, don't be agitated. Calm down. My son is missing. How can I calm down? I'm already calm enough. Then, if you're willing to pay for an interprovincial arrest at your own expense, I can report it to the captain and ask him to dispatch manpower. But I don't have the money. Chuho laughed mockingly. He suddenly felt that such a system was extremely ironic. She clearly grasped Xiaobao's movements, but she felt powerless. Chuho, we are also very concerned about Xiaobao and his safety, but there is really nothing we can do about this. After all, you don't even have a household registration, so the director won't pay any attention to you. Enough. She didn't want to hear these pompous words. I'll think of a way myself. Chuho returned to the hospital in a daze. Just as he walked to the door of the ward, he saw Mu Yanqing standing at the door, leaning against the wall and smoking silently. She walked into the ward as if she did not see him. Meng Qingxue saw her return and asked nervously, "Chuho, have you found any clues?" Chapter 27-28. Meng Qingxue could not help feeling a little disappointed when she saw her expression. What's wrong? The license plate doesn't match? Or, we already know the car's whereabouts. It's a white Baojun 730. Yes, that's right. However, I don't know the model of the car. I only know that it has 7 seats and is very big. However, the back seat has been dismantled, and the logo is a horse. After the car drove to the capital, it went to Yishan City. Then, since we've got a lead, shouldn't we be able to arrest the suspect immediately? We need the chief's approval. Meng Qingxue looked puzzled. What do you mean? We're just commoners. The chief won't pay attention to this case at all. Even if we have the suspect's whereabouts, an interprovincial arrest requires 100,000 yuan. The annual budget allocated by the provincial bureau is limited. The chief won't use that sum of money for a small fry like me. Besides, I don't have 100,000 yuan at all. Meng Qingxue was stunned and felt a little anxious. Then, are we just going to sit back and do nothing? We clearly have the suspect's whereabouts. Are we just going to sit back and do nothing Because of this reason, Qingxue, this society is very cruel. Everything depends on one's background to make a living. You don't have one, so who will pay attention to you? Meng Qingxue was speechless. Chu Ho said, I'll think of another way. I can help you find the person. Mu Yanqing's calm voice came from behind. Chu Ho and Meng Qingxue turned their heads in unison, only to see him enter the ward. He said calmly, to me, finding a person is not a difficult task. I can help you. Oh, you're so kind? Chu Ho did not believe that he would be so kind. Of course, it's not without conditions. Mu Yanqing's gaze suddenly fell on Meng Qingxue. As long as you're willing to return to the capital with me. Chu Ho raised his eyebrows in disgust. Are you trying to use this as a bargaining chip to threaten Qingxue? How is this a threat? It's just a condition. Mu Yanqing shifted his gaze from Chu Ho to Meng Qingxue. Qingxue, I can help you find the person you're looking for, but the condition is that you must return to the capital with me. Meng Qingxue sneered. Why do you want me to go back to the capital? I can't leave you here alone. Meng Qingxue bit her lips and gripped the bedsheets tightly. After a long silence, she suddenly smiled and nodded gently. All right. Chu Ho was shocked. Qingxue, don't force yourself. I'm not forcing it. Meng Qingxue smiled. Chu Ho, it's all right. It's just going back to the capital with him. It's not that harsh of a condition. The most important thing now is to find Xiao Bao. With that, she turned to look at Mu Yanqing. Can you really help me find Xiao Bao? Yes. All right, then. As long as you find Xiao Bao, I'll return to the capital with you. On the other side, the Gu residence. In the spacious bedroom, Xiao Bao lay on the bed with his limbs stretched out. He slept exceptionally soundly through the night without any dreams. He woke up early in the morning. When he opened his eyes, the first rays of the morning sun had just appeared outside the window. He sat up and looked around. The spacious room was designed in an antique Chinese style. Even the furnishings were full of classical charm. It was solemn and elegant, and it was extremely grand. Chapter 27-29. It must have been sent by that kind-hearted uncle, right? He didn't throw him to the police station. He got out of bed and walked out of the bedroom. This was a very large suite. Other than the bedroom, there was a living room, a study, and a large bathroom. Walking into the bathroom, he was pleasantly surprised by the huge bathtub. Wow, it's so big. He mumbled exaggeratedly. The little white dog, who had been resting in the living room, immediately ran over excitedly. It circled around him and stuck out its tongue. Woof woof. The sound was crisp. Chu Xiaobao picked it up and rubbed its little head, only to find that someone had given the little white dog a bath. Its originally dirty fur had become incomparably white and beautiful. Its body smelled fragrant. Little White, you smell so good. Who gave you a bath? Little White huffed and stuck out its tongue, but naturally it wouldn't answer him. The little dog's crisp barks alerted the servant guarding outside the door. There was a knock on the door. Immediately after, a maid in a cheongsam pushed the door open and entered. She smiled and said, Xiao Bao, you're awake? Chu Xiaobao was shocked and looked at her a little warily, appearing to be extremely guarded. Who are you? You can call me sister. The maid squatted down gently in front of him and said gently, I'll give you a bath, okay? I wanted to give you a bath last night, but Master saw that you were asleep, so he told us not to wake you up. I can bathe myself. I don't need your help. Gu Nianji was young, but since he was young, he had been taught that there were differences between men and women. Naturally, he would feel shy when a woman of the opposite sex bathed him. However, the maid said, Master told me to help you bathe. Master? The image of a white-haired old man suddenly appeared in Chu Xiaobao's mind. The corners of his lips twitched. Who is Master? Master's name is taboo. How can we servants have the right to call him by his name? Chu Xiaobao pouted. I want that handsome uncle from yesterday to bathe me. Handsome uncle? Yes, it's that uncle who is very good-looking but looks very fierce. The maid didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiao Bao, the man you're talking about, is it Master? Chu Xiaobao was speechless. He's not old. He's clearly very young. The maid didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This Master was not referring to the old grandpa. In the Gu residence, everyone in the Gu family had to respectfully address Gu Jinglian as Old Master. The Gu family was a wealthy family with 100 years of history. Therefore, the system in the family also maintained the old rules. Old Master was a respectful title for the head of the family. Gu Jinglian was the head of the Gu family because everyone in the Gu family had to address him as such. Master is still resting. Let me wash you. No. Chu Xiaobao lowered his head awkwardly, his face red. If you bathe me, I'll feel weird. Then, I'll stand aside and watch you. How about you wash yourself? The bath was very deep. If such a young child were to slip, it would be very easy for him to drown. She had this concern. Chu Xiaobao reluctantly agreed. The maid carried him into the bathroom, ran a bath of hot water for him, and carried him in. Chu Xiaobao protected his chubby body and asked with a red face, Can you turn your back? I'm a little embarrassed if you look at me. This little guy even knew how to be embarrassed. Chapter 27:30. Chu Xiaobao had already learned how to bathe by himself, but his movements were a little clumsy. Half an hour later, he carefully climbed out of the bathtub and used a towel to cover his private parts. He then said, I'm done bathing. Okay, I'll help you put on your clothes. No, I'll wear my own clothes myself. I don't need your help. The maid had no choice but to bring the clean clothes over. He clumsily put on his clothes and even shamelessly walked in front of the full-length mirror to admire himself. However, when he looked at himself standing in front of the mirror and saw his disheveled appearance, he felt a little disappointed. He rearranged his clothes until the mirror reflected his clean and tidy appearance in a shirt. Only then did he smile in satisfaction. However, the clothes seemed a little too big. In fact, these clothes were not bought according to his size. In the middle of the night, the clothing stores were all closed. Gu Jinglian asked his subordinate to prepare a set of clean clothes for Chu Xiaobao. His subordinate searched the Gu residence, and coincidentally, the son of the Gu family's butler was 6 years old. He had bought a few sets of new clothes and had not had the time to wear them, so he contributed them to the Gu residence. However, only the hem of the clothes was a little too long, so they barely fit him. Aya, so cute. The maid sized him up and could not help but feel that he was extremely cute. She could not help but look at him again and again. Chu Xiaobao was a little shy from being stared at by her. His face was boiling hot, and he nervously tugged at the corner of his clothes, looking a little uneasy. Don't keep staring at me, Chu Xiaobao muttered. Just as he finished speaking, his stomach suddenly grumbled, creating a huge ruckus. Aya, he was hungry again. Chu Xiaobao lifted his head and looked at her eagerly. The maid held back her laughter and asked gently, Then, big sister will take you to have breakfast. Okay? Okay. Chu Xiaobao's eyes lit up when he heard that there was good food, and he allowed the maid to carry him to the dining room. The Gu family's mansion was located in a suburban villa where every inch of land was worth gold. It was said that the Gu residence was a rare piece of land with good feng shui that had been passed down for hundreds of years. Therefore, it could be said that the Gu residence had a history of more than 100 years. 10 years ago, the Gu residence was renovated, and a large area of the Gu residence's courtyard was renovated. More than a dozen elders of the Gu clan for hall masters and more than 100 members of the Gu clan lived here. How big was the Gu family? To be precise, it covered an area of more than 100 mu. Among them, 60 to 70 mu were manicured courtyards and gardens, close to 150 bedrooms. It was located in the north and faced the south. On the east side was a side door for servants to enter and exit. In addition, there were 5 secret doors. A majestic stone lion was placed in front of the gate to suppress evil. There were nails on the door, 9 in length and 9 in length, a beast-headed door ring, and totems of tortoises, snakes, lions, tigers, and phoenixes. After entering through the main door, there was a wall photo, which was a screen. There were marble, jade, and also redwood carvings of birds and beasts. After the wall photo, there was the courtyard. There were artificial mountains and flowing water, pavilions, terraces, and long corridors with 9 bends and 18 bends. Most of them were where the servants lived. The men lived on the left, and the women lived on the right. Further in, there was a stable on the left and a kitchen, laundry room, and other utility rooms on the right. After the courtyard, there was the main hall. There was an offering table, and chairs. Behind the main hall was the master's living quarters. Between the main hall and the living quarters was a long corridor. On both sides of the corridor was a large pond and a garden. There were many beautiful red carps in the pond. Chapter 27:31. Why was this place so big? The palaces he saw on TV were nothing more than this. Moreover, walking through the courtyard, there were bodyguards in suits standing at the door and hall, as well as servants wearing cheongsams. He didn't know that this handsome uncle was from a wealthy family. When he finally walked from the guest room to the dining room, Chu Xiaobao was so tired that he slumped on the chair. He was so tired that his eyes lost focus as he stared blankly at the antique wooden ceiling. He couldn't help but feel a little empty. Are you tired? The guest room is indeed a little far from the dining room, but just treat it as a morning exercise. The maid said with a smile, "This place is really big." Chu Xiaobao panted slightly and said, "I'm even hungrier after walking all the way here. What do you want to eat? I'll ask the kitchen to make it for you. I like to eat noodles." Chu Xiaobao said carefully, "Okay, is red soup noodles? Okay. Okay." The maid entered the kitchen. Taking advantage of her absence, Chu Xiaobao began to look around curiously, looking at every decoration in the dining room. The dining room was very big, with a strong, new Chinese style. The tables and chairs were made of high-quality red sandalwood, and it was the most expensive red leaf sandalwood. Ordinary people might not think much of it, but red leaf sandalwood was expensive in the world, even if it was a string of beads. The Gu family was rich enough to polish it into furniture, cabinets, screens, and reliefs. Red sandalwood was also known as Hainan pear wood. Whether it was hardness, softness, or fineness, it was superior. From a medicinal point of view, it was Hainan Wang Wali. It had a fragrance that could adjust the environment. Therefore, as soon as he stepped in, Chu Xiaobao smelled a faint fragrance that refreshed the heart. The ceiling was made of black rosewood from Laos. Authentic black rosewood was sold for 6 figures per ton in the market. Authentic black rosewood from Laos was the best. The black rosewood here was also called big leaf red sandalwood. In fact, it was originally called big leaf red sandalwood, but later came out of the national standard. In the national standard, big leaf red sandalwood was called black rosewood, so now the standard name was black rosewood. It was very expensive. The Gu family was rich enough to make a large number of hanging ceilings. If it had to be converted in terms of money, such a restaurant, which was only a few dozen square meters, was probably worth tens of millions. Although it looked reserved, it was actually extremely luxurious. Chu Xiaobao walked to a shelf and found an extremely beautiful vase. Out of curiosity, he couldn't help but take the vase down and hold it in his arms, touching it with his small hands. Behind him, the maid's gentle voice suddenly came. "Do you like to eat eggs?" Ah, Chu Xiaobao was startled. His hand trembled, and he almost dropped the vase. Fortunately, he was nimble enough to catch it. He let out a long sigh and turned around, but his heart still had lingering fear. "Sister, this vase is really beautiful. Is it very expensive?" When the maid saw the vase in his hand, she was slightly startled. Then she nodded and said, "Yes, it was indeed very expensive. But this is not a vase. This is enamel from the Ming and Qing dynasties, also known as cloisonné. It's an antique." Xiaobao's hands almost trembled again. Antique, cultural relics? He had seen special reports on cultural relics in the Forbidden City on television, so he had a very clear understanding of cultural relics. Cultural relics were priceless. It must be worth a lot of money. He tried to probe. Chapter 2732. If it's put up for auction, it'll start at a few million yuan. The maid smiled as she introduced it calmly. Chu Xiaobao held his breath for a moment. He put the enamel back in its original position in trepidation, feeling like he had just survived a disaster. If he hadn't caught it in time just now, would he have to pay for it? But he had seen on TV that those relics were carefully placed in glass cases. No matter how bad it was, it wouldn't be placed so randomly, right? What if an antique vase was placed in the dining room and someone accidentally broke it? Chu Xiaobao asked with lingering fear. Since this is an antique vase, why is it placed here so casually? Shouldn't it be more particular and be worshipped properly? The maid said disapprovingly. Old Master ordered this antique to be placed here. Why? Chu Xiaobao was even more confused. Because Old Master thought it would look good here. What kind of reason was that? This handsome uncle was so rich that he didn't even care about antiques and placed them casually. He didn't feel the pinch, even if they were broken. He was so envious. If he was so rich, he could eat 10 sanding buns every morning. He wouldn't have to worry about saving money for lunch. He could eat and drink as much as he wanted. If he was as rich as this handsome uncle, wouldn't he be able to eat all the delicacies in the world? Forgive him for being so useless. As long as he could eat his fill, wear warm clothes, and have an endless supply of delicious food every day, he would feel very happy. When Gu Jinglian woke up, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. His biological clock was very punctual. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. When the butler brought his clothes over, he couldn't help but ask, "Where's the child from last night?" "Old Master, the child woke up very early and is having breakfast in the dining room now." Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows slightly. However, he heard the butler say, "Old Master, what should we do with the child?" Since he was awake and had eaten his fill, it was time to send the little guy away. He had already made an exception to let him stay at the Gu residence last night. Hence, Gu Jinglian instructed, after breakfast, send someone to take him to the police station. "Master, won't you see him again? That child seems to be clamoring to see you. There's no need for that. It's hard not to feel annoyed when I see it." "Yes, I understand." The butler nodded and retreated. Gu Jinglian held his head lazily and got out of bed. He walked to the living room and sat on the sofa. He took a sip of the tea that the housekeeper had just brewed. He was used to being particular about tea in the morning. He had a bad stomach. Therefore, in the morning, she was used to brewing a cup of black tea. It was warm and very nourishing for the stomach. Gu Jinglian felt relieved when he thought about how he was going to send the child away this morning. His ears finally had some peace and quiet. After Chu Xiaobao finished his breakfast, he heard the housekeeper say that he was going to be sent to the police station. However, he was a little reluctant and looked depressed. What about that handsome uncle? I want to find him. Master still has something to do after breakfast. It's not convenient for him to send you to the police station, so he ordered me to send you there. Chapter 27:33. He lowered his gaze in disappointment, as if he was a little sad. He couldn't help but feel a little lonely. Does handsome uncle hate me? Does he find me annoying? The old butler was slightly startled. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The child's thoughts were more meticulous than he had imagined. Master had never liked children. He had never been patient with children. Master liked cats and had a completely black cat by his side. When he was free, he would carry the black cat and take a walk in the yard. It could be seen that Master's personality was more of a loner. He didn't like children. However, he couldn't say it in front of Chu Xiaobao. Otherwise, it would inevitably hurt the child's heart. He's just a little busy. The butler comforted him kindly. Master has a lot of work to do, so he can't personally send you to the police station. Oh, all right then. Chu Xiaobao nodded. He smiled slightly and said politely, "Thank you, grandfather." "It's nothing. This is my duty." The butler liked this child from the bottom of his heart. It was not because of any other reason, but because this child's facial features were very similar to Master's when he was young, especially that pair of eyes. Although they were not the same, they were very similar. The most different thing was that when Gu Jinglian was young, his eyes were extremely indifferent, as if they were condensed with an ethereal mist. However, this child's eyes were extremely clear and had a kind of spirit and alertness unique to children. One look, and one could tell that he was an intelligent child. It had to be said that this was a kind of fate. The butler prepared a small bag for him. It contained some snacks and desserts, as well as some water. When he arrived at the police station, he probably wouldn't have such good conditions. After all, the police station was busy with their own matters and couldn't take care of him. He was afraid that the child would be hungry in the police station and no one would take care of him. So he thoughtfully prepared snacks and drinks. Chu Xiaobao was a little embarrassed to accept it, but the butler said this was prepared by Master. Did handsome uncle prepare it for me? Yeah. Chu Xiaobao said emotionally. I didn't expect uncle to be so handsome, so rich, and so kind. The butler was speechless. The old master was handsome, young, and rich. He had to admit these 2 points. However, he couldn't agree with the phrase, still so kind-hearted. After all, the child was innocent and did not know the ways of the world. The Gu family was not a good place. It was a dragon's pool and a tiger's den that many feared. Chu Xiaobao took the small bag with a smile and said happily, Then I'll reluctantly accept it. When the old butler sent the child to the police station, he happened to bump into the deputy director. The deputy director and the Gu family had been dealing with each other for many years. After knowing the ins and outs of the matter, he straightforwardly promised to help the child find a home. However, after some investigation, according to the clues provided by Xiao Bao and the names of his family members, they were unable to contact Chu Ho, because the internet did not have Chu Ho's household registration information. As for the phone number provided by Xiao Bao, when he called it, he was notified that it was not in service. Chu Xiaobao stared at the number in confusion for a long time. He didn't know if he had remembered it wrongly, but in his memory, this was the number. Chapter 27:34. The deputy bureau chief was also in a dilemma for a moment. He patiently asked if Xiao Bao had remembered wrongly. Xiao Bao scratched his head, and for a moment, he also had some self-doubt. He used to memorize Chu He's phone number by heart, but he rarely called her. Usually, he would just stay at home and watch TV if there was nothing important. He asked him to memorize her number just in case. However, as time passed, he could not remember the number clearly. When he tried to recite it with difficulty, it was indicated that the number was no longer in service. The deputy bureau chief started from the household registration information, but he could not find any information about Chu-ho. This was natural. Strictly speaking, Chu-ho was a missing person. After being missing for 4 years, the family could apply for the cancellation of the household registration. But what was even more worrying was that Chu-ho did not have any memories of her identity. She had tried to find her identity, but she could not find any information about her on the internet. When she lost her memory, she went through the police network. Whether it was DNA comparison, face comparison, or ID card information database, she could not find any information about her past. There was no information, only a few special identities. First, Chu-ho might have been a returned Chinese in the past. She did not have any nationality, so it was difficult to search her country's information database. Second, it was unlikely that she was an illegal resident. Third, her identity was special. For example, if Chu-ho was a special organization of Juandue, it would be difficult to find her identity information on such a network. This kind of organization had its own information database, and only after leaving the organization would the information be placed in the country's identity database. For example, special agents or black officers. However, Xiaobao did not mention that Chu-ho was a missing person. More importantly, he did not know much about Chu-ho's past. He only knew that he did not have a father. The deputy bureau chief searched for a long time, but he could not find any clues. Thus, he could only propose a DNA comparison method. However, this required the technical means of DNA testing. To draw blood, the housekeeper told the little guy about this, and the little guy's face immediately collapsed. Draw blood? The image of a doctor in a white coat holding a huge syringe appeared in Xiaobao's mind. He immediately said with a sad face, "That must be very painful." He lied to him. "It won't hurt. Just poke it with a needle." Xiaobao shook his head like a broken drum. No, don't try to lie to me. Injections are very painful. It's so painful to poke such a sharp thing into the body. But if you want to find your mother, this is the only way. Otherwise, you can't provide detailed information about your mother, right? What about your father? At the mention of Daddy, Baby Chu lowered his head in disappointment and pouted even more aggrievedly. "I don't have a father. The housekeeper tried his best to comfort, and finally managed to coax the tears that was about to come out of his eyes. In the end, Baby Chu finally decided to compromise. Hence, the deputy director sent someone to bring the child to the hospital to collect information. This old housekeeper was quite good at coaxing children. Chapter 2735. He still had some tricks up his sleeves. After collecting Xiaobao's DNA and sending it to the database for comparison, the deputy bureau chief said that it would take at least 2 days to complete. Hence, in the end, Chu Xiaobao was still brought back to the Gu family. Gu Jinglian was originally checking the accounts at the casino when he received a call saying that Xiaobao was not able to provide any useful information and was brought back to the Gu family. What? Gu Jinglian was obviously unhappy. Why didn't you leave him at the police station? The police station is short of manpower, so they won't be able to take good care of this little guy. Moreover, the little guy said that he wanted to go back to the Gu family to look for you. He seems to rely on you, old master, so Gu Jinglian smirked coldly. Uncle Fu, I've never seen you so soft-hearted before. Uncle Fu smiled, awkwardly. Gu Jinglian was too lazy to argue with him. Settle him down first, and don't let him cause any trouble. Understood. Uncle Fu suddenly thought of something, and had a flash of inspiration. He looked at Xiao Bao, who was fiddling with his fingers, and thought about it carefully. Old master, this little guy looks so much like you. Do you want to do a DNA test with you? Are you suspecting that he's my child? Gu Jinglian's lips suddenly turned cold, and his tone froze. Do you think that with my style, I would be so sentimental as to leave a child outside? No, I don't mean that. Old master, please don't think too much. I'm just… Gu Jinglian snorted coldly, and could not be bothered with him. He hung up the phone and continued to check the accounts. The accounts of the casinos were huge and could easily reach hundreds of millions. Generally speaking, he would personally check the accounts to prevent anyone from tampering with them. Checking the accounts of the 4 major casinos under the Gu family's name was extremely complicated. Only a capable person like Gu Jinglian could do it in a day. When the checking of the accounts was completed, it was already 8 o'clock in the evening. After dinner, he returned to the Gu residence. However, when he opened the bedroom door, he saw a certain little girl lying on her stomach in her pajamas on his big bed. She was reading a fairy tale comic on the bed with great interest. His expression immediately turned cold. When Chu Xiao Bao heard the sound of the door opening, he came back to his senses and turned to look at the door. When he saw that it was him, he immediately jumped off the bed and ran to him. He smiled and said, "Uncle, you're back?" Gu Jinglian's face darkened. "Why are you in my room?" "I asked Uncle Fu. He brought me here." Chu Xiao Bao didn't have any ulterior motives and directly answered. Gu Jinglian's face turned ashen when he heard this. He gritted his teeth and said, "This old man… Uncle, please don't blame Uncle Fu. I was the one who wanted to sleep with you." Chu Xiao Bao still knew how to make excuses for others. Gu Jinglian resisted the urge to kick him out of the door. He raised his hand and pointed to the door. "Go back to your room." He was used to living alone since he was young. He had been alone since he was 3 years old. This habit had never been broken even after he became an adult and had a woman. Even though he had had a woman before, he had never stayed with anyone. He was already used to sleeping alone. Moreover, with his unreasonable obsession with cleanliness, he hated having too much physical contact with anyone. For women, it was just a biological need. "I don't have my own room," Chu Xiaobao muttered, feeling wronged. Chapter 2736. But it's so lonely to sleep alone. Moreover, the room is so big, I'm a little scared. I keep feeling that this house is eerie and scary, as if it's haunted. Chu Xiaobao had seen a domestic horror movie before, and the plot was set in such an ancient house. Just thinking about it made his hair stand on end. Gu Jinglian's gaze turned colder, and his thin lips parted slightly. "Kid, my patience is limited." Before he could finish speaking, Chu Xiaobao suddenly grabbed his hand and led him to the sofa with a smile on his face. Gu Jinglian was pushed to sit on the sofa with a blank expression. Chu Xiaobao went behind him with a fawning expression and started to massage his shoulders vigorously with his 2 small hands. "Uncle, are you tired? Let me massage your shoulders." Gu Jinglian was speechless. This kid seemed to be good at bootlicking. Trying to please me? He raised his eyebrows coldly and glanced at him from the corner of his eye. He was not going to fall for this. "No, I really think that Uncle has worked hard. You must be tired after work. Let me massage your shoulders. You should be able to relax a lot." The corners of Gu Jinglian's lips twitched violently. Xiao Bao massaged his shoulders vigorously. Although he did not have much strength, he put in a lot of effort to massage him. After a while, he was sweating profusely, and his back was covered in a layer of sweat. Gu Jinglian was too lazy to interrupt him. As he massaged his shoulders, he said patiently and patiently, "Uncle, your house is so big." Gu Jinglian did not reply. Xiao Bao continued to nag to himself. One bedroom is as big as my house. Moreover, the bathtub is so big, it can raise so many goldfish. And it's not good to live in a house that's too big. Xiao Bao said eloquently. Such a big house makes people feel very insecure. Moreover, it's eerie, as if it's haunted. Chu Xiaobao saw that he was indifferent from the start to the end, and like a loyal dog wagging its tail, he walked over to him and lay on his lap. He lifted his little face, but his expression was so innocent that no one could bear to reject him. I'm most afraid of the dark and ghosts. If Mommy was here, she would sleep with me no matter how late she came back. So, Uncle, can you keep me company tonight? I'll tell you a story and coax you to sleep. He finally revealed his motive. This little fellow was only 5 years old, but he was already quite scheming. He knew that he had to curry favor with someone in order to achieve a goal. Gu Jinglian smirked and retorted, Do you think I'm you? It's okay. Uncle's sleeping alone. You're lonely? I can keep you company too. I'm a very interesting storyteller. I can tell you any story you want to hear. He did not have the habit of listening to bedtime. Gu Jinglian commanded coldly, Go back to your own room. Xiao Bao's expression froze. Gu Jinglian's coldness had frightened him. When he thought of going back to that big but eerie room and sleeping alone in the dark, he felt extremely aggrieved. He suddenly pouted, and his handsome and adorable face instantly wrinkled. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and he looked like he was about to cry. Chapter 2737. Gu Jinglian suddenly felt a headache coming on. He was already fuming from reconciling the accounts. Now that he was crying and throwing a tantrum, his head hurt even more. As he cried, he saw Gu Jinglian's gloomy face. He was just putting on an act, but seeing that his expression was not, he was completely scared to tears. Hence, he sat down on the ground and rubbed his eyes with his chubby little hands. His wails were quite earth-shattering. It was as if the whole world was going to shake after his cries. Once a child's childish voice cried. His voice would be sharp and ear-piercing, especially loud. Gu Jinglian was shocked by his cries. He stared blankly at the crying little guy. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Uncle, you're so bad. You're so heartless. Boo-hoo. Uncle, you're a bully, he cried bitterly, and as he cried, he complained about his crimes. Stop crying. Gu Jinglian shouted at him. He glared at him fiercely. His fierce gaze frightened the little boy even more. Before he could finish a coherent sentence, Chu Xiaobao cried hysterically again, abruptly interrupting him. Wah! Gu Jinglian suddenly had a splitting headache, but there was nothing he could do about it. He was at a loss. He shouted at him again. If you cry again, I'll throw you into the pond to feed the fish. Wah! Uncle wants to throw me to feed the fish. Wah! Chu Xiaobao cried even more sadly, as if Gu Jinglian had done something so outrageous that even the heavens could not tolerate it. Gu Jinglian wanted to strangle him. He had never been patient with children, let alone the ability to deal with them. Just hearing Xiaobao's cries echoing in his ears made him extremely irritated. The fiercer he was, the more Chu Xiaobao cried. His eyes were red and swollen, and tears kept flowing out of his eyes. Pay attention, they were tears. He did not know where this child got so many tears from. They flowed without stopping. Were his eyes the source of a spring? Gu Jinglian had completely lost his patience. He suddenly stood up and wanted to leave. If this little fellow wanted to stay in this room, he would change rooms. In short, he didn't have the patience to coax this little ancestor. However, just as he stood up, Chu Xiaobao immediately cried and hugged his thigh, not letting him go. Uncle, don't abandon me. Don't abandon Xiaobao. Gu Jinglian said coldly. I'm warning you, let go. Uncle, other than my mother, you're the best person to me. Even you don't want me anymore." Gu Jinglian was startled. Chu Xiaobao's tearful and sorrowful attack left him at a loss for words. Xiao Bao didn't have a father since he was young. Uncle is like Xiao Bao's father. He cares about Xiao Bao and takes care of Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao silently swore in his heart that when he grows up, he will repay Uncle well and take care of him when he's old. And when he's old, this guy was cursing him? Is it because Xiao Bao is too troublesome? So Uncle doesn't want Xiao Bao anymore. Gu Jinglian said bluntly, "Yes." Xiao Bao stopped crying and stared at him anxiously. "You're very annoying." Xiao Bao's tearful eyes were glistening. "Really? Xiao Bao is really annoying. Very annoying." Sob. Chapter 2738. He was originally aggrieved, but now he was crying sadly. Gu Jinglian was upset. He got up anxiously, left the room, and slammed the door. Surprisingly, Xiao Bao did not chase after him. Instead, he cried even more sadly and fell to the ground. It was as if he had been abandoned by the whole world. He cried with incomparable despair. Gu Jinglian slept in the guest room. The guest room was very small compared to the master bedroom. He liked large rooms. Perhaps it was his personality. He did not like small spaces, just like his ambition that could not be underestimated. Xiao Bao's crying made him full of anger. He went into the shower and took a cold shower. After washing up, he lay on the bed, but he could not fall asleep. Baby Chu's cries reverberated incessantly in her ears. He was completely brainwashed by his crying. He never thought that there would be a child who was not afraid of him at all and liked to stick to him. He never thought that he was fated to be with children. Young children tended to like people who were approachable. However, it was precisely the keyword of approachability that he had no contact with. Unfortunately, he met this little brat. No matter how he threw a tantrum, glared at him fiercely, and shouted at him fiercely. He was fearless. Instead, he actually felt sad when he said those heart-wrenching words. Dependence? Why did this child rely on him for no reason? Gu Jinglian closed his eyes, but Xiao Bao's pitiful little face appeared in front of him. He suddenly opened his eyes, and his childish words seemed to echo in his ears. "Uncle, I'm scared. I'm scared. You are the person who treats me the best in the world besides my mother. Even you don't want me anymore?" This little guy was quite pretentious. Was he still crying? Could it be that because of his unintentional hurtful words, he was so sad that he did not sleep and was still hiding in the room and crying? Another scene appeared in Gu Jinglian's mind. Xiao Bao was trembling under the blanket alone, hiding under the blanket. Because he was afraid of the dark, he was so scared that he did not even dare to breathe loudly and was shivering. Children were all afraid of the dark, ghosts, and demons. He was only 5 years old, so he didn't have any ability to resist these things. What he said just now was indeed very hurtful. After all, she was a child. It was normal for her to be pretentious. Moreover, even if she liked to stick to him, it would only be for a short while. He was a man. Why would he be so calculative with a child? Gu Jinglian was caught in a dilemma. Half an hour later, he appeared at the door of the master bedroom again. He really felt like he was possessed. Gu Jinglian was dressed in his pajamas. He pushed open the bedroom door and thought that he would see the scene that he had imagined. For example, the clingy little brat was tossing and turning in fear under the blanket. However, as soon as he opened the door, the child's innocent laughter immediately rushed into his ears. "Ha ha ha ha! It was so fun! I want more!" Gu Jinglian looked in the direction of the voice and saw Uncle Fu sitting on the bed, holding 100,000 little jokes. Xiao Bao was lying under the blanket, shaking with laughter. There were tears in the corners of her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. Instead, they were tears of laughter from the jokes. Gu Jinglian was speechless. What the hell? Chapter 2739. The child's face and the weather in June could really change so quickly. Uncle Fu heard the commotion at the door and immediately looked up. When he saw that it was him, he immediately stood up and smiled wholeheartedly. Old master, why aren't you asleep yet? Not asleep yet? Wasn't it because he was worried that the little rascal was so frightened that he couldn't sleep well? Chu Xiaobao also noticed him and looked over. First, he glanced at him. Then he crossed his arms angrily and turned his face to the side, as though he was angry with him. Humph! He seemed to be angry at him and snorted disdainfully. Angry at him? Gu Jinglian felt the anger that had subsided suddenly surge up again. He still had the cheek to be angry with him. Chu Xiaobao asked angrily, "Why are you back? You still have the cheek to look for me." Chu Xiaobao said angrily, "Are you asking me to forgive you? Humph! Scoundrel, big scoundrel. I won't forgive you." Gu Jinglian was so angry that his face was contorted. He glared at him, but before he could say anything, Xiaobao made a face at him and said, "Scoundrel, go away. I don't want to see you." Gu Jinglian's face was as gloomy as it could get. He had the urge to kick him out. When Uncle Fu heard this, he immediately tried to smooth things over and coax Xiaobao, saying, "Xiaobao, you can't say that about Uncle. He's worried about you and concerned about you. That's why he came to see you." "I don't want him to worry about me," Xiaobao said stubbornly. "He's a scoundrel and he hates me. Why would he care about me?" "Xiaobao, good children don't hold grudges. Uncle must be worried that you won't be able to sleep. That's why he came to keep you company." Uncle Fu continued to smooth things over. Gu Jinglian was furious. "Old man, do you want to die?" "Master." Uncle Fu immediately walked over and whispered into his ear, his heart aching as he said, "When I entered the room just now, the little guy was crying sadly. His crying was earth-shattering. It took a lot of effort for me to stop his tears. I had to tell him a few jokes to make him stop crying. If you yell at him again, he might cry until dawn." Gu Jinglian was still angry. "You need to be taught a lesson." "Old master, it's not like you don't know that when a child cries, the sky falls and the earth rends. If he continues to cry uncontrollably, the entire Gu residence will be in chaos because of him." Gu Jinglian looked at him coldly. "Are you blaming me? Make him cry? I wouldn't dare. This old man is not criticizing you, master." Uncle Fu continued to persuade him patiently. "Master, why lower yourself to the level of a child? Moreover, children are a little childish and love to cry. But this child is sensible, cute, innocent, and kind. He's not a troublemaker. It's quite pitiful that he lost his father at such a young age. The Gu family will take care of him for 2 days at most. Once there's news from the police station, he will be sent home. Master, you're wise. Don't lower yourself to the level of a child." Gu Jinglian's face was still tense. "Why don't you go and coax him?" Uncle Fu tried to persuade him again. "I can see that this child likes you very much." Gu Jinglian took a deep breath. He didn't know where he found the patience to listen to Uncle Fu and not lower himself to the level of Chu Xiaobao. Thus, he walked to the side of the bed and sat on his side, looking at him coldly. "Uncle, it's not good. Don't be angry, okay?" Chapter 2740. He did not have much patience, and this was his bottom line. However, Chu Xiaobao did not appreciate it at all, and continued to raise his little face proudly, looking as if he did not care about it at all. "Your apology is not sincere at all." Bang! Gu Jinglian's patience finally snapped. He clenched his fists tightly, making cracking sounds. Gu Jinglian suddenly clenched his fists. Uncle Fu saw that the situation was not good, and immediately rushed over and hugged his arm. "Master, calm down." Baby Chu was also frightened by the man's frightening expression. He swallowed hard as he looked at the latter's horrifying expression, for fear that his neck would be broken if he said another word. "If you have something to say it properly. Don't fight," the little guy warned seriously. "Do you believe that I won't break your neck?" He gritted his teeth. Chu Xiaobao was so shocked that he was tongue-tied. He was so frightened that he immediately hugged his own neck, his face pale. How savage! He knew it. This scoundrel's gaze was as if he wanted to break his neck. Murder is against the law. "Here, my words are the law," Gu Jinglian said coldly. "Brat, if you don't know what's good for you, I'll really throw you to feed the dogs." Wu Xiao Bao pretended to cry again. Uncle Fu immediately comforted him with cold sweat. "Xiao Bao, don't cry. Master is just scaring you." "Shut up," Gu Jinglian shouted angrily. Fu Bo immediately put on an extremely aggrieved expression. Gu Jinglian glared at Xiao Bao angrily, and just like that, they stared at each other. After a long while, Chu Xiaobao swallowed again, licked his dry lips, and then said in a trembling voice, "Uncle, don't be angry. I'll forgive you, okay? Let's make up, okay? I'm not angry anymore, and don't throw me to feed the dogs." Gu Jinglian furrowed his eyebrows. Seeing his sincere attitude, Gu Jinglian's angry expression improved slightly. "It's a promise. Behave yourself and don't cry." Yes, yes." Chu Xiaobao immediately nodded his head like he was pounding garlic, his pair of innocent eyes staring at him. Gu Jinglian made a pact with him again. "Sleep alone, be quiet, and don't make a fuss, okay? And then, okay." Chu Xiaobao was really afraid that he would throw him to feed the dogs, and quickly agreed to this condition. "Go back to your room." Gu Jinglian ordered again. Chu Xiaobao could not wait any longer. She nimbly flipped over and got off the bed. She did not even bother to put on her shoes. Barefooted, she ran out of the room. Uncle Fu immediately said, "I'll take him back to the guest room to rest." Gu Jinglian did not express his opinion, which was taken as a tacit agreement. Uncle Fu immediately chased after her and closed the door behind him. Once the little guy left, the room suddenly became quiet. Gu Jinglian immediately felt comfortable. He lay on the bed, and his ears were finally quiet. But what he did not know was that Xiao Bao was really frightened by him. After returning to the guest room, he hid under the covers. He thought that if he was disobedient and restless, this bad uncle would really wring his neck and throw him to the dogs. He was terrified, so much so that when he returned to the room and hid under the covers, he was so scared that his whole body trembled. His tears and snot wet the pillow. No matter how Uncle Fu coaxed him, it was of no use. Gu Jinglian's words left a huge shadow in his young heart. It wasn't until dawn, when the little fellow was tired from crying, that he fell asleep in a daze with tears in his eyes. Chapter 2741. On the other side, another 24 hours had passed. Chu Ho finally began to feel anxious when he did not receive any news from Xiao Bao for a long time. No matter how resourceful Mu Yanqing was, it would still take some time to find someone. After Chu Ho provided the license plate number to Mu Yanqing sent his subordinates to look for him. Because of Meng Qingxue, Mu Yanqing could not personally go to look for him. He had to stay in the hospital to take care of her. Chu Ho originally wanted to go along, but Meng Qingxue said that if he went along, the gains would not make up for the losses if he encountered danger. It was better to let Mu Yanqing's men go and bring the person and the car back directly once they found him. Although Chu Ho was worried, he could only force himself to wait calmly for news. Indeed, it would not help if she went. If she encountered a sudden situation and could not get along with the team, it would be counterproductive. Hence, Chu Ho waited patiently in the hospital for news. Meng Qingxue was even more anxious than him. She liked Xiao Bao. Now that Xiao Bao's whereabouts were unknown, she had a greater responsibility. Even though Chu Ho repeatedly emphasized that Xiao Bao's accident had nothing to do with her. However, Meng Qingxue did not think so. What she was thinking was that if it were not her, baby Chu would not be implicated in this matter. Meng Qingxue was even more anxious. She did not know how to atone for her sins if Xiao Bao was not found, just as she was feeling uneasy. Finally, at 3:10 a.m., Mu Yanqing received news that the target's car had been found. It was said to be parked at the entrance of a small underground gambling den in Yishan County. Gambling den? Yes. Are you sure it's a van? It's a Baojun 730 MPV. The license plate matches. It should be the person you're looking for. Mu Yanqing ordered expressionlessly. Bring everyone back. Also, take good care of that child. Don't let him get hurt. Do you understand? Yes. Understood. Yishan City was a large city right next to the capital. Although the city was large, it was economically backward due to its geographical location. Originally, the country wanted to support it, but Yishan City was surrounded by mountains. If it were to develop into an industrial city, there would be a lot of limitations. Therefore, Yishan City still focused on agriculture. Many young men and women who were born in Yishan City would go to Beijing to work after graduation. Tong'an County was one of Yishan City's counties with relatively good economic development. When Mu Yanqing's men arrived at the scene, they saw the Baojun with the black license plate A87B9L parked quietly outside the entrance. These two men were born and raised in Yishan City. One was called Luo Qing, and the other was called Luo Hao. They both came from Luo Village. 2 years ago, they followed a large group of people from the county to work in the capital. In the beginning, they could bring home some money at the end of every year. However, as time passed, they gradually picked up some bad habits in the bustling metropolis. For example, gambling and ice skating. Ice skating was naturally not the kind of ice skating. They were involved in eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. As time passed, the savings they had accumulated were all squandered. The money they earned from working was not enough to pay off their debts. Thus, when they were at their wits' end, they began to engage in some unclean activities. Chapter 2742. Meng Qingxue was the biggest order they had ever taken on. After robbing the money from Song Enya, they returned to Yishan City. Initially, they vowed to start a small business, but as soon as they returned to Yishan City, they plunged into the county's gambling den. In just 2 days, they squandered more than half of the money they had earned. When Mu Yanqing's men arrived, they followed the clues and found their car. Hence, they sneaked into the small gambling den. The gambling house was a common type of underground gambling house. They usually played bullfights and the like. It was not a big deal, but this was only compared to the big gambling houses in the capital. A single win or loss could easily cost thousands or tens of thousands. For Yishan City, where the average income per person was less than 2 days, this was already an astronomical figure. At this time, the atmosphere in the underground gambling den was at its peak. When he found Luo Qing and Luo Hao and Luo Qing were playing happily. Luo Hao was casually chewing on a cigarette with a poker card in his hand. Amidst the smoke, his eyes were half closed. Luo Qing was standing behind him, watching with great interest. Suddenly, someone patted him on the shoulder. Luo Qing waved his hand, unhappily. "Don't bother me. I'm nervous." "Are you Luo Qing?" A man's incomparably cold voice suddenly came from behind. Luo Qing froze for a moment before turning his head in shock. When he did, he saw a few men in black suits standing behind him. They were tall and sturdy, and their expressions were cold. The man in the lead had a pair of hawk-like eyes that stared fixedly at him, as if they were knives. Who are you? Luo Qing swallowed hard and asked in a daze. Don't care who we are. Are you Luo Qing? Luo Qing suddenly realized something, and his whole body began to tremble. He probably vaguely realized the identity of these people in front of him and staggered a step with a guilty conscience. Unexpectedly, he was also a quick-witted person. He knew that this group of people was coming for him, and Luo Hao, so he quickly turned around and ran. Chase after them. Luo Qing ran out of the door, quickly unlocked the car, and started it. Seeing that the men in black suits were about to catch up, he stepped on the accelerator and wanted to escape. Alas, who would have thought that he would fall into a trap? Did they not know who sent these people? Most of them were soldiers. After careful consideration, they had already guessed that these two people would be restless and want to escape. Hence, they had done something to the car in advance. The forefront and rear tires were ruthlessly punctured. When they stepped on the accelerator, the car suddenly skidded and the tires idled, and they almost flipped over. Luo Qing held on to the steering wheel, drenched in cold sweat, knowing that he could not escape, but he did not dare to get out of the car. The man in the black suit stepped forward and grabbed the handle of the car door. He pulled it, and it was locked from the inside. Luo Qing was secretly pleased with herself, but she did not expect the man to be so ruthless. She did not know where he got his strength from, but he pulled the locked car door open fiercely. Get out of here. Behave yourself. Chapter 2743. Thinking that these men were sent by Song Enya, he immediately said, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have snatched that money. I'll definitely return Miss Song's money. 100,000 yuan, not a penny less. Please don't take me to jail. I beg you. What nonsense are you spouting? The man kicked him fiercely, and Luo Qing immediately fell silent. Soon, Luo Hao was also dragged out of the gambling den. He had just won some money and was feeling smug. However, before he could count the money in his hand, a group of strong men appeared out of nowhere and dragged him out. Even when his hands were handcuffed, he still didn't know what was going on. It was only when he was taken out of the door and saw Luo Qing squatting on the ground that he understood what was going on. So that's what happened. He also thought that Song Enya had called the police to arrest them. He could not believe that this woman really dared to call the police. For a moment, he gritted his teeth in hatred. However, just as they thought that they would be taken to the police station for interrogation, a man in black walked up to them and questioned in a deep voice, Where's the child? The child? Luo Qing and Luo Hao looked at each other in shock before saying, The child isn't with us. Who sent you here? Did Miss Song send you? What Miss Song? The man frowned unhappily and immediately took out a photo from a hidden pocket in his suit. It was a photo of Xiaobao when he was 4 years old. Luo Qing stared at it for a long time before he realized who the child this man was talking about was. You're looking for this child? Luo Qing immediately said, This child isn't with us. Where's the child? The child. Luo Qing was in a dilemma. Luo Hao also said gloomily, The child really isn't with us. Wasn't he left in that warehouse? We took the money and left. We didn't care about the child. The man furrowed his eyebrows, clearly confused. Thus, he gave the others a look one after another. Let's bring these two people back first. Let Chairman Mu handle it. Yes. After a 12-hour drive, Luo Qing and Luo Hao were brought back to the capital overnight. In the ward, Luo Qing and Luo Hao were dragged into the ward. Chuho had not slept for 2 days and 2 nights. She was extremely sleepy, but because she was worried about Xiaobao, she had not slept for 48 hours. She was so tired that her eyes were bloodshot. Chairman Mu, we've brought them. Luo Qing and Luo Hao were dragged into the ward. Their backs were violently kicked, and the two of them fell to the ground in an extremely sorry state. They struggled to stand up, but the black-clothed man behind them kicked them again. They could only kneel on the ground obediently with a mournful expression. Chairman Mu, these two men are called Luo Qing and Luo Hao. They are the people you're looking for. Mu Yanqing frowned and asked, "Where's the child?" Chu, he stood up abruptly and staggered over to them. She sized them up before turning around and asking, "Qing Xue, were these two really the ones who took baby Chu away that day?" Chapter 2744. Chu Ho turned around again, this time without any grace. She suddenly went forward, grabbed Luo Qing's collar with one hand, and asked fiercely, "Where did you hide Xiao Bao?" "Xiao Bao? Are you talking about that chubby little boy?" Luo Qing asked in confusion. He did not remember the child's name. "Don't you care? Where did you hide the child that you took away from here that day? Speak." Chu Ho's voice was laced with a thunderous aura. For 2 days and 2 nights, there was no news of Xiao Bao, and her patience had been exhausted. Luo Qing was scared half to death by her fierce expression. He trembled all over, and even his voice was trembling. That child wasn't hidden by us. We were just following orders. That child was brought to the capital by us. Then we took the money and left. That child was in the warehouse, and we didn't take him with us. We don't know what happened to him after that. Due to his nervousness and great fear, his words were incoherent and unclear. Chu Ho lost her patience and gave him a hard punch. This punch was so powerful that it almost dislocated his jaw. Luo Qing was so scared that his face turned pale, but he did not dare to resist at all. He had never seen a woman with such a terrifying aura. That look in her eyes was as if she could not wait to skin them alive, as if she was a wild beast that wanted to devour humans. Meng Qingxue got out of bed and asked angrily, "That day you broke into our house, stuffed Xiao Bao into a car, and took him away. What exactly happened? Who ordered you to do this?" It was only when these two men were kidnapped by Mu Yanqing that she believed that all of this was not his doing. If it was not him, who could it be? "We were also following orders. The employer gave us money, so we did it for her. We took the child away, but when we brought him over, the employer said that it wasn't the child she wanted. What happened?" Mu Yanqing also felt that something was amiss. "The employer said that she wants, as Luo Qing spoke, she sized up Meng Qingxue, who was standing at the side with trepidation. She wanted to say something but hesitated, seeming to have some misgivings. "Be honest and tell me everything. Otherwise, don't even think about leaving this place alive." Mu Yanqing chided sternly. With a plop, Luo Qing knelt on the ground in fright. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. "Spare me. We have no enmity with this lady, but our employer instructed us that she wanted a child. We misheard her instructions and misunderstood her intentions. When we brought the child over, she said that she wanted the child in this lady's womb." Luo Qing explained in a trembling voice as she carefully looked at Meng Qingxue. Meng Qingxue's face paled, and she could not help but cover her lower abdomen with lingering fear. Mu Yanqing frowned coldly. "What do you mean?" "That employer said that she wanted the child in this lady's womb. She could either get rid of the child or kidnap her as well. But in a moment of folly, we mistook the child for the target and took him away." Meng Qingxue could not help but stagger a step, her heart beating like thunder. Chapter 2745. Mu Yanqing came to his senses as well. His eyes were filled with anger, as if a storm was brewing. Finally, he gritted his teeth and enunciated each word clearly. What's the name of your employer? I don't know. Luo Qing lowered his head, appearing extremely guilty. How could she tell us her name so easily? This is not something to be proud of. We did not find out her identity or name. We only know that she seems to have a strong background and is very generous. She offered a high price of 500,000 yuan and said that as long as we complete the task, she will give us 500,000 yuan as a reward. 500,000 yuan. Was Mu Yanqing's child so cheap? Do you really not know her name, or are you deliberately hiding it from us? Chu Ho suddenly questioned. Luo Qing kept quiet. Luo Hao, who was standing at the side, suddenly thought of something and stammered, I remember that her surname is Song. She's a very young woman, dressed to the nines with heavy makeup. Her tone is very arrogant, like a rich missy from a big family. Song. At the mention of this name, Mu Yanqing's expression changed. He seemed to have some idea of the employer's identity. Song Enya. It's her. However, if it was Song Enya, it was not surprising that she would do such a thing. She probably knew that Meng Qingxue had left the capital and secretly settled down in Yen City to take care of her pregnancy. Meng Qingxue was pregnant with his child. If Meng Qingxue secretly gave birth to this child, it would indeed be extremely disadvantageous for her. He was not surprised that she would do this. Meng Qingxue was stunned, only to see a strange expression on Mu Yanqing's face. Being a sensitive person, she immediately guessed that he must have guessed who this employer with the surname Song was. Furthermore, he was very familiar with it, so when Luo Hao mentioned this surname, Mu Yanqing's expression changed instantly. You know her? Meng Qingxue could not help but ask. Mu Yanqing remained silent. Tell me. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists and said coldly, At this point, are you still trying to guard against me and hide everything from me? Mu Yanqing, I'm sure you know who this employer is. Tell me, who is it? Mu Yanqing looked at her with a complicated expression. Then he took a deep breath and said weakly, Song Enya. Song Enya? This name was unfamiliar to Meng Qingxue, and she was puzzled. Mu Yanqing stroked his forehead with a headache and explained, She's my fiancée. Boom. Meng Qingxue's mind went blank at the sound of the explosion. That night, before I left the capital, I called you. Was she the woman who answered the call? Meng Qingxue made a bold guess. Mu Yanqing did not intend to avoid the topic, and merely nodded silently. Meng Qingxue suddenly found it extremely funny. She laughed coldly and fell on the bed in a daze. For a moment, she felt like laughing and crying at the same time. She wanted to cry because she had almost lost the child in her stomach because of this woman. What was laughable was that he had openly announced Song, Enya's fiancé. How ironic! Indeed, what reason did she have not to do so? Chapter 2746. As Mu Yanqing's fiancé and the future young mistress of the Mu family, what reason did this woman, Song Enya, have to let her hide in an unfamiliar corner of the city and secretly give birth to her and Mu Yanqing's flesh and blood? This child was a huge threat to her status. There was no reason for her to let it go. Hence, hiring a hitman to kill her had become a duty-bound action. She wanted to kill the child in her womb before it was born. She wanted to kill it while it was still in the womb. What a vicious woman! What a cruel method! Meng Qingxue sneered. Very well. This woman was so shrewd and scheming that she couldn't help but shudder in fear. However, at the same time, a certain force in her heart silently awakened. Since this woman called Song Enya had declared war on her in such a way, what reason did she have to hide in a corner and drag out an ignoble existence? Did she want to eliminate her and snatch Mu Yenqing away from her. Dream on. Meng Qingxue decided that no matter what, she would fight Song Enya to the end. She wanted to take back everything that belonged to her, even if it didn't belong to her. With this thought in mind, Meng Qingxue laughed coldly. Seeing her sneer, Mu Yenqing thought that she had been provoked. Just as he was about to walk over, Meng Qingxue pushed him away fiercely. Looking at Luo Qing and Luo Hao, she questioned fiercely, "Where's the child now?" "Great Aunt, we really don't know. After taking the money, we took it that we had completed our mission and left. How could we be in the mood to care about that child?" "So, you left the child there?" Luo Qing did not dare to speak. "Where did you take the child?" Seeing that they did not say a word, Chu He suddenly raised her leg and kicked Luo Hao's shoulder fiercely. There was a cracking sound, which seemed to be the sound of a dislocated shoulder joint. Luo Hao immediately clutched his shoulder and fell to the ground. She took a step forward, grabbed him by the collar, and said coldly, "If you don't tell me the truth, I won't be merciful anymore. Speak." An abandoned warehouse in the outskirts of the capital. Luo Hao was in so much pain that he howled like a pig being slaughtered. His lips trembled as he said, "The location of the transaction is a warehouse in the suburbs. That place used to be a famous industrial area. Later on, it was abandoned. As for the specific coordinates, I really remember them all too clearly. I only remember that there were many abandoned factories there. At that time, the child was left alone in the warehouse. After that, we left. Please spare my life. Please spare my life. Mother of ***. Chu Ho cursed for the first time. He couldn't wait to tear these two men into pieces. I seem to remember a place in the suburbs of Beijing. It used to be a large industrial area. Later, the government wanted to transform it into an ecological park. However, the land was too polluted, so the project was put on hold and it became a deserted place. Mu Yenqing recalled for a moment and had some ideas. Meng Qingxue held his wrist tightly and said anxiously, "Then we will return to the capital tomorrow. The most important thing now is to find Chu Xiaobao as soon as possible. Maybe he's still there." What about you?" he asked out of the blue. Chapter 2747. Meng Qingxue glanced at Chu Ho, then looked deeply at Mu Yenqing before nodding solemnly. "Okay, I'll go back to the capital with you." Mu Yenqing's eyes lit up. "Really? You've changed your mind?" Yes. Meng Qingxue had already made up her mind to fight Song Enya head-on. Since the latter was pushing her so hard and leaving no room for negotiation, then there was no need for her to hide and show mercy. Mu Yenqing was hers to begin with. She would no longer be weak. Even if she had to resort to unscrupulous means, she would take back what belonged to her. Meng Qingxue clenched her fists tightly and said to Chu Ho, no matter what it takes, I must find Xiaobao. Don't worry. Chu Ho said, I'll go with you. Mu Yenqing glanced at Meng Qingxue. Seeing that she did not object, he nodded. Then let's pack up immediately and prepare to return to the capital. Okay. Ever since Gu Jinglian scolded Xiaobao that night, Xiaobao did not like to stick to him, nor did he call him uncle. In the morning, Xiaobao woke up and stayed in his room alone. Uncle Fu liked him, so he took special care of him and carried a stack of comics for him. Uncle Fu had specially bought this stack of comics. Uncle Fu realized that this child seemed to be especially interested in drawing. No matter how restless he was, once a comic book was placed in front of him, he would immediately calm down. Hence, for the entire morning, Xiaobao stayed in his room and quietly flipped through the comic books. During lunchtime, a call from the police station came in. On the other end, The deputy chief was holding the DNA report and comparing it with the data obtained from the DNA gene bank. He held the phone in his hand and was confused. He did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Xiao Bao's DNA test results are out. When will you bring him to the police station to find out more about it? Have you found his family members? Yes, but I'm a little doubtful about the authenticity of this result. Perhaps there's a mistake with the system. So, is it convenient for you to tell Mr. Gu to come to the police station with Xiao Bao personally? There are some situations that require his presence. Uncle Fu furrowed his brows, nodded, and said solemnly, I understand. As soon as Gu returned to the Gu residence, Uncle Fu came up to him nervously and briefly explained the matter. Why do you want me to go? That's what the chief said. President Gu, do you have any plans for the afternoon? No. Gu Jinglian said lightly, I have no patience for that child anymore. You can just send him to the police station. After saying that, he walked around Uncle Fu and walked towards the study. Butler Fu suddenly chased after him carefully and said worriedly, Mr. Gu, I suspect that the director asked you to go with him personally, not because of any other reason. It's because you have to go. Gu Jinglian sized him up coldly with a strange expression. He asked faintly, What do you mean by that? Uncle Fu stammered and seemed to have some concerns. I can't really say, because there's something that I'm not sure about. Anyway, old master, there's nothing wrong with you going along and personally verifying it. Chapter 2748. Uncle Fu could only explain vaguely. I don't really understand what the deputy bureau chief meant. He only said that there are some things that you need to verify personally. I suspect that the results of the DNA investigation are probably related to you. Me? Gu Jinglian curled his lips coldly, and his gaze gradually turned cold. What does it have to do with me? Uncle Fu lifted his eyes and glanced at him. Then he said carefully, It's a parent-child relationship. Gu Jinglian's expression changed. Then, as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, he said coldly, You're joking with me? Old master, I wouldn't dare. Even if I had eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts, I would never dare to joke about such things. Uncle Fu felt extremely wronged. He looked like he was about to burst into tears. Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. That's impossible. How can that little rascal be my son? He's so timid and stupid. My son would definitely not be as stupid as him. Uncle Fu thought to himself, Isn't it a little too early for old master to say these words? What if he got slapped in the face? Suddenly, there was some movement in the room. Uncle Fu could not care less about Gu Jinglian's expression. He hurriedly pushed open the door and rushed into the room. He saw Xiao Bao lying on the bed, his tender and fair legs bouncing up and down. He seemed to be really satisfied. The commotion just now was because his movements were a little too big, and he accidentally swept the finished comic book to the ground. When Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the room, Chu Xiao Bao was halfway through the comic book. It was an exciting moment when he was abruptly interrupted. He felt extremely wronged. His little face was wrinkled, and he looked like he wanted to cry, but had no tears. However, when Uncle Fu carried him out, the little guy looked up and saw Gu Jinglian leaning against the door with his arms crossed and a cold expression. Especially when the little guy met Gu Jinglian's incomparably cold gaze, his originally stormy little face completely collapsed. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his mouth, letting out a wail. He was so frightened that he started crying loudly. Wah! Gu Jinglian was already in a bad mood. He was even more baffled by the little guy's actions. His face suddenly became gloomy, and as a result, his expression became even more cold and terrifying. Xiao Bao could not help but feel his hair stand on end. He grabbed Uncle Fu's sleeve tightly because he was afraid. He finally could not care less about his little stubbornness and started crying loudly and wantonly. I want to go home. Mommy. He cried loudly and hugged Uncle Fu tightly. Tears rolled down from his eyes uncontrollably. Mommy, I want Mommy. Gu Jinglian had a splitting headache from his actions. He shouted angrily, "Don't cry." This ferocious cold shout scared Xiao Bao even more. He waved his hands, obviously wanting to stay away from Gu Jinglian, as if he was seeking protection. He stared at Uncle Fu with tears in his eyes, making people feel pity for him. Sob, sob. I want to go home. I don't want this uncle. Xiao Bao, don't cry, okay? Be good. We'll take you to find Mommy. Uncle Fu immediately comforted him. Uncle, carry me, okay? I don't want him. I don't want this uncle. This uncle is so fierce. He'll definitely eat me. Chapter 2749. Even if Uncle doesn't eat me up, he'll break my neck and feed me to the dogs. Boo-hoo. Xiao Bao doesn't want to die. Gu Jinglian's threat from last night was still fresh in his mind. Uncle Fu coaxed him helplessly. Uncle is not a monster. Gu Jinglian was extremely helpless. He finally couldn't take it anymore and sent someone to drive the car over. Then he instructed Uncle Fu, "Hurry up and send this little guy to the police station." With that said, he went into the study in frustration and slammed the door shut. Uncle Fu couldn't help but shrug nervously at the loud noise. Uncle Fu had no choice but to send Xiao Bao to the police station alone. The car slowly drove into the police station. Uncle Fu carried Xiao Bao out of the car and walked into the police station. The bureau chief had been waiting for him for a long time. He was surprised to see that Gu Jinglian didn't come with him. "Where's Mr. Gu?" "Mr. Gu is very busy." "Deputy Bureau Chief, please tell me what you need." The deputy bureau chief frowned and sighed. "It's like this. We sent Xiao Bao's DNA to the gene bank for comparison. The results are a complete match with Mr. Gu's. That means this child might be related to Mr. Gu by blood. Might be. We can't rule out the possibility that there's something wrong with the system. So I wanted to invite Mr. Gu along to see if he's willing to cooperate and do a DNA test with Xiao Bao. This way, the results will be more accurate." Uncle Fu lowered his head and glanced at Xiao Bao, who was trembling in his arms. He frowned and suddenly hissed. He seemed to be worried. As if he had gone through a long mental struggle, he suddenly asked cautiously, "Mr. Gu isn't here, but for the DNA test, can we use his hair?" When he was cleaning the room this morning, he paid special attention to the bed pillow. It took him a lot of effort to find a very short strand of hair on Gu Jinglian's bed. Thus he collected it. It was not because of any other reason. It was because Xiao Bao and Gu Jinglian looked too similar. In this world, there were no two leaves that were exactly the same, and there were no two people who looked so similar for no reason. They weren't related to each other, but not only were their facial features similar, the unintentional expression between their eyebrows was also 50% similar. He paid special attention to it. Coincidentally, the deputy director had called him in the morning to tell him the results. Uncle Fu felt even more strange in his heart. He increasingly suspected that Xiao Bao and Gu Jinglian were really related by blood. Could it be that he was Master's illegitimate child? Thus, Uncle Fu carefully took out a well-wrapped handkerchief from his pocket. He opened the handkerchief and carefully wrapped a strand of hair in the middle. The deputy bureau chief asked, "Are you sure this strand of hair belongs to President Gu? If you make a mistake, it will affect the results." "It can't be wrong. Next, I'll have to trouble the deputy director to examine it." The deputy bureau chief nodded. "It's a small matter. We'll get the results in the afternoon." Then Uncle Fu immediately asked, Have you found the child's mother? No. The deputy bureau chief nodded solemnly. There are still no results in the DNA database. Anyway, the DNA test will take some time. I'll contact you in the afternoon when the results are out. Chapter 2750. In the car, Xiao Bao sat sullenly in Uncle Fu's arms. He pouted and muttered, "Uncle, that uncle is also very fierce to you. Don't you hate him? Although old master's temper is a little eccentric, he's very good to me. Although he doesn't show his concern, there are times when he occasionally shows his gentleness." The little guy did not understand what Uncle Fu was saying. He tilted his head with a puzzled expression and blinked his black eyes at him, but he did not understand the adult language. In the little guy's heart, Uncle Fu was a very gentle elder who was good to him and cared about him. In comparison, although that handsome uncle had a beautiful face, he felt that his heart was very black. It turned out that not all bad people were ugly. There were also people like this uncle who, although good-looking, was actually fierce and evil, just like a demon king. In Xiao Bao's ignorant heart, Gu Jinglian's image had already been stamped with a seal of approval, a demon king. If Uncle Fu knew what the little guy was silently criticizing at this moment, he would probably not know whether to laugh or cry. Last night, Meng Qingxue decided to return to the capital with Mu Yanqing. Naturally, Chuho wanted to follow them. After obtaining a precious clue, she naturally wanted to go to the capital personally to find Xiao Bao. Hence, there was no time to even pack her luggage. Anyway, to Meng Qingxue, there was nothing useful, just some personal belongings and daily necessities. These could be bought again when they returned to the capital. Now that time was of the essence. It was not something that could be measured by these worldly possessions. Meng Qingxue and Mu Yanqing were in the same car. Chu Ho, on the other hand, was in the other car. She had not slept for 2 days and 2 nights and was extremely tired. Hence, not long after she got into the car and set off, she leaned against the back seat and fell asleep. Where was Meng Qingxue? She was also exhausted. She had been on tenterhooks for 2 to 3 days. Although she closed her eyes to rest, she did not sleep well. After all, she had been trembling in fear and worried about Xiao Bao's whereabouts, so she could not sleep well. Hence, after getting into the car, she leaned on Mu Yanqing's shoulder and closed her eyes to rest. After a while, she fell into a deep sleep. Feeling the weight on his shoulders, Mu Yanqing tilted his head to look at her before lowering his gaze to her flat stomach. He did not know if it was because she was too skinny, but her lower abdomen still looked flat and did not show any signs of bulging. She was probably too thin. He remembered that when his sister was pregnant, her belly was already slightly swollen at 3 months. What about Qing Shui? There were no signs of pregnancy. And Qing Shui? He glanced at her and saw that she was sleeping peacefully. He lowered his eyes and unexpectedly reached out his large palm. His warm palm gently pressed against her lower abdomen. His movements were extremely gentle, as if he was afraid that if his movements were too big, it would disturb the little life that was still sleeping in her stomach. Even through the belly, he couldn't sense any signs of life. She was more than 3 months pregnant, so there shouldn't be any fetal movements, right? He often saw men who were excited to become expectant fathers and excitedly pressed their hands against their bellies to listen to the fetal movements. He felt that it was ridiculous. Chapter 2751. It should be laughable, right? However, the birth of a life could indeed change a man's mentality to a great extent. Initially, when he learned about the birth of the little life, he was at a loss and even a little suspicious. One had to know that he had always taken good contraceptive measures. He rarely let her take pills. It was not that he had never had sex with other women, but usually after having sex, he would urge his women to take the morning after pill. After all, there were many women who wanted to carry his child. Naturally, he would not let any fish escape the net. However, when it came to Meng Qingxue, he was more proactive. Usually, he would take the initiative to take precautions. Sometimes, when he really could not help himself and was not prepared beforehand, he would let her make up for it afterward. However, it was also very rare. After all, he knew that it was not good for a woman's health to take such pills. However, when he found out that she had a child with him, he found it hard to accept at first. He was not ready to be a father yet. A man in his 20s was still very playful, especially at this critical juncture where the Mu group was in a crisis. He felt even more repulsed. Gradually, however, it was only after Meng Qingxue left that he came to realize that he had developed so many feelings for her that he should not have. He actually had great expectations for the little life in her stomach. He actually did something that he used to think was the stupidest thing. For example, Mu Yanqing carefully held her head, bent down slightly, and gently pressed his ear to her lower abdomen. However, after listening for a while, he did not hear anything special. There shouldn't be any fetal movement in 3 months, right? Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and muttered to himself. He raised his head and met Meng Qingxue's indifferent gaze. Why was she awake? Mu Yanqing thought of how she had seen all of his silly actions earlier. Feeling embarrassed, he could not help fidgeting uneasily in his seat. When did she wake up? Wasn't she asleep? Then, did she see everything he did just now? Mu Yanqing bit his lip speechlessly. Meng Qingxue could not help but ask him, "What are you doing?" Ahem. Mu Yanqing furrowed his brows and pretended to be calm. "Picking things up." Meng Qingxue smiled and asked, "Why are your ears on my stomach when you're picking things up?" Mu Yanqing was even more at a loss for words. Meng Qingxue suddenly said, "It's still early. I can't hear any fetal movements." Mu Yanqing did not bother to hide it anymore. He cleared his throat awkwardly as his cheeks turned unnaturally red. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. Mu Yanqing was stunned for a moment. He picked up his phone and saw a string of numbers flashing on the screen. The number was not saved, but from the last digit, he knew that it was Song Enya's number. He did not make any special remarks. Mu Yanqing stared at the number in a daze. After a moment of hesitation, he suddenly hung up. Meng Qingxue had a strange look on her face. She couldn't help but ask, "Why aren't you answering?" "Oh, it's not a particularly important call." "Was it Song Enya calling?" Meng Qingxue asked. Mu Yanqing's face stiffened again. Before he could explain himself, his phone rang again. It was Song Enya, who was persistent in calling him. The urgent ringtone kept urging him to hurry up. Chapter 2752. Meng Qingxue said calmly, "It's okay. Just answer it. She must have something important to tell you." He said, "I don't want to answer it." "But you haven't answered it, and she keeps calling. The ringtone is very noisy." Since Meng Qingxue had said so, Mu Yanqing seemed to have no reason not to answer the call. He was worried that Meng Qingxue would mind, but seeing her indifferent expression, he answered the call. "Hello, Yanqing. Why did you hang up on me just now?" Song Enya's gentle voice came from the other end. She asked patiently, but her words expressed a lot of dissatisfaction. "Is it inconvenient?" Mu Yanqing felt an inexplicable sense of annoyance when he heard her voice. The thought of this woman being so heartless to force Qingxue to such a state made him feel that it was unreasonable. However, he still hadn't sorted out the series of events, and he hadn't figured out how to deal with it. "What's the matter?" Song Enya was dissatisfied with his tone and sounded a little impatient. Hence, she became a little unhappy. "Must I only call you when something's up?" "It's nothing." There's nothing to talk about. Mu Yanqing's attitude was very cold compared to his previous aloof attitude toward her. It was much more indifferent. Hence, she said with some dissatisfaction, "Where have you been these 2 days? You didn't even answer my calls. You seem very busy." How could Song Enya not know where Mu Yanqing had gone? She knew that Mu Yanqing had personally led his men to Yen City, but she did not know that he was now on the way back to the capital with Meng Qingxue. "You don't have to ask so much about my whereabouts, do you?" Yanqing. Song Enya was slightly dissatisfied, and at the same time, aggrieved. "You're my fiancé and my future husband. No matter how unwilling you are, you can't deny this fact. As your fiancé, don't I have the right to ask about your whereabouts?" Her voice fell into Meng Qingxue's ears through the receiver. She couldn't help but frown as her eyes gradually turned cold. When she found out that the two men were acting under her orders, and that she was the culprit behind her unborn child's death, her hatred for the Missy had reached its peak. Maternal instincts dictated this. Any mother would not tolerate any sand in their eyes. They would never allow anyone to harm their own flesh and blood. Even though she did not know who Song Enya was, she was already at loggerheads with her after what had happened. At the thought of this, the corners of her lips curled up coldly. She reached out and hugged Mu Yanqing's arm. Frowning slightly, she pretended to be uncomfortable and groaned softly. On the other end of the line, Song Enya, who was holding the phone and listening to the silence for a long time, suddenly heard a woman's faint moan. "It hurts." Meng Qingxue gently covered her lower abdomen with a pained expression. Yanqing. Song Enya was sure that she heard a woman's voice from the receiver. For a moment, she became nervous and immediately suspected Meng Qingxue. "He's with that be asterisk TCH. Meng Qingxue. Who else could it be if not this woman?" Chapter 27:53. Don't tell me that he's bringing Meng Qingxue back to the capital to nurse her pregnancy. At the thought of this possibility, an inexplicable fire ignited in her heart as she felt a great sense of crisis. "Mu Yanqing, did you hear what I said?" At this moment, Mu Yanqing was a little alarmed by Meng Qingxue's weak moans of pain. However, Song Enya's stern voice on the other end of the phone made him lose his patience, and he could not help but sound a little anxious. "What? Mu Yanqing, who's that woman beside you?" Song Enya asked aggressively. "Are you questioning me?" Mu Yanqing retorted expressionlessly. "It's none of your business who I'm with, right? Mind your own business, and don't worry about me." With that, he looked at her worriedly. Seeing her pale face, his eyes suddenly became a little flustered. "What's the matter?" "It hurts." Meng Qingxue's voice was more like an invisible provocation. Although it was very weak, it was still brazenly provoking Song Enya's brain. There was no need to think about who had made that sound. She could even tell that Meng Qingxue was deliberately diverting Mu Yanqing's attention while blatantly provoking her through the phone. This Meng Qingxue must know who called Mu Yanqing, so she's provoking me so arrogantly. The asterisk emenet. Mu Yanqing. Song Enya was so angry that the veins on her forehead were throbbing. "I'm busy now," Mu Yanqing said coldly and hung up the phone. Song Enya held the phone in a daze. When she heard the busy tone from the other end, the corners of her eyes twitched violently. She was so angry that she actually smashed the phone on the ground. *TC. She cursed angrily, as if not venting her anger. She picked up the phone and smashed it again, as if the phone was Meng Qingxue. Is this Meng Qingxue planning to officially declare war on me? Was she trying to declare her sovereignty over her by doing this? At the thought of this, Song Enya could not suppress her anger. Her face was ashen as she clenched her fists. Suddenly, Her lips curled into a bloodthirsty sneer. Fine. Meng Qingxue. Since you've declared war on me, then I'll naturally accompany you to the end. Mu Yanqing's attention was focused on Meng Qingxue after he hung up the phone. Thinking that she was in pain again, he carefully placed his large palm on her lower abdomen and anxiously said, "Hold on for a while more. We'll be in the capital soon. Once we're in the capital, I'll transfer my lower abdomen earlier, but it's better now." Meng Qingxue smiled weakly. She felt a little satisfied when he hung up on Song Enya without any hesitation. Between her and I and Song's, between the two, Song and Qingxue's, this man says that this knowledge made her somewhat elated. At the very least, he cares about me. All right, don't worry, and don't be so nervous. Didn't the doctor say that I'm fine? Meng Qingxue consoled him, feeling amused. He reminded her worriedly, "If you feel unwell, tell me immediately. Don't hide anything from me." Chapter 2754. Uncle Fu brought Xiao Bao Chu around the Wanbao building. The Wanbao building had a very famous children's entertainment place called Leji Children's King. There were many game machines that were suitable for Xiao Bao to play. Chu Xiao Bao had never seen such a bustling building before, let alone such a bustling place. Leji Children's King sold products for infants aged 0 to 13, including clothes, milk powder, calcium tablets, and toys. Chu Xiao Bao, who was originally in a very low mood, was immediately attracted by the many toys displayed in Leji Children's King when he stepped into the shop. For a moment, he was like a little mouse that had fallen into a rice jar, and all his unhappiness was thrown to the back of his mind. "Uncle, look, look." Chu Xiao Bao ran in front of a whack-a-mole game machine, and his eyes lit up. "What is this?" Uncle Fu walked over and squatted down beside him, and then patiently said, "This is a game machine. You see these little mice?" After a pause, Uncle Fu smiled and picked up a small red hammer that was hanging at the side. He handed it to him and explained, "When the game starts, these little mice's heads will pop out of the holes. At this time, you have to use the small hammer in your hand to hit the little mouse's head hard. This way, you can get 1 point." Wow! Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to have countless little stars surging. It seemed very fun. Chu Xiao Bao's eyes were filled with anticipation. Then does this game require money to play? Although the little guy was still young, he already had the concept of money. He already knew that when he was outside, there were many things that required money. However, his mother had told him before that he could not simply spend other people's money. Therefore, he did not mention that he wanted to play. Instead, he looked at the flashing red light of the game machine with a yearning look on his face. Uncle Fu could tell what he was thinking. He smiled knowingly and immediately called the shop assistant over. He then paid for the coins and returned to the game machine with the coins. He saw that Xiao Bao was still holding the small hammer and staring at this extremely novel toy, so he deliberately teased him. "Xiao Bao, do you want to play?" Xiao Bao nodded heavily without any defense, but suddenly thought of something and said carefully, "This game costs money. Forget it. I'm just looking, not playing." "Here." Uncle Fu opened his palm. Xiao Bao looked over and saw a few coins lying quietly in his palm. He was surprised. "What are these?" "Coins. As long as you put in the coins, you can play." Once he heard that he could play the game, Xiao Bao could not help but be excited. His face was flushed with excitement and yearning. He asked tentatively, "Can I really play?" Of course." Uncle Fu smiled knowingly, and then put a coin into the terminal. After a while, the screen showed start. He gently urged, "Xiao Bao, the game has started." "Ah." Xiao Bao immediately raised the small hammer in his hand and smashed it heavily on the little mouse's head that popped out of the hole. Squeak, squeak. The little mouse let out a scream and retreated back into the hole. So fun. So fun. Chapter 2755. It was Xiao Bao's first time playing, so his reflexes were not particularly nimble. Although he used a lot of strength, he was sometimes too nervous and could not perform well. Several times, he missed his target. Uncle Fu also became nervous and kept pointing out the mountains and rivers. Quickly hit that side. Over there, over there. Here. Baby Chu panted as he hammered away at the wall with his small hammer. Uncle Fu watched from the side and couldn't help but sigh silently in his heart. Thinking about the old master when he was young, he still remembered that when Jinglian was 6 years old, they went to the commercial street to play. At that time, there was a huge pirate ship in the middle of the commercial street. At that time, Gu Jinglian was young. At the age of 6, he was really at his most playful age. He clamored to play. However, as the future successor of the Gu family, the family had extremely high hopes for Gu Jinglian. As the eldest son of the Gu family, Gu Jinglian's every word and action were strictly controlled. At the age of 4, he had already started receiving strict training. Shooting, karate, jujitsu, he still remembered the first time he went to the shooting range. Little Jinglian threw a tantrum because he did not like such a serious occasion. In the end, his strict father threw him into the detention room as punishment. For the entire night, he knelt in the detention room and was not allowed to get up. The next morning, it was Uncle Fu who personally carried him back to his room. He had already lost all feeling in his knees and was unable to stand. From then on, his personality changed drastically. He was no longer as energetic as a normal child. His personality also became increasingly gloomy, and he did not like to get close to anyone. At the age of 6, Gu Jinglian had already seen countless bloody scenes with his father. Once at the casino, the 6-year-old Gu Jinglian watched helplessly as a gambler who cheated had his hands crippled by the casino's hired thugs. The ground was covered in blood, but there was no fear on his young face. It was as if this was a normal scene. Uncle Fu looked at Xiao Bao and sighed. At the end of the round, the little guy was sweating profusely, but he only got 10 points. The shop assistant stood to the side and watched. Chu Xiao Bao's serious expression as he played the game was too funny. She couldn't help but ask, "Little friend, is this your first time playing?" Chu Xiao Bao nodded in a daze and looked at her shyly. The shop assistant explained, "If you can clear the game and break the record, you have a chance to win a heavyweight prize." Chu Xiao Bao's eyes seemed to be filled with countless little stars as he asked excitedly, "What's the prize?" The shop assistant pointed at the rules of the game and briefly introduced them. The final record was 100 points. Uncle Fu looked at it carefully. If he could break the record, he would be able to get the latest AI robot developed by Leji Holdings. It was a global limited edition. However, there was a prerequisite. Parents could not give any help in this game. The child had to break the record with his own strength in order to win the prize. Uncle Fu and Xiao Bao talked about this. Chu Xiao Bao clenched his fists and looked determined to win. "I will work hard and win the prize." He looked like a tiger eyeing its prey with ambition in his eyes. Uncle Fu stayed by his side and was responsible for putting in the coins for him. He silently watched over him. Halfway through the game, the police station called. Chapter 2756. Thus, he walked to the side and picked up the phone. On the other end of the line, the deputy bureau chief sounded worried and conflicted. "The diagnosis report is out. It's basically confirmed." When Fu Bo heard this, he frowned slightly. "Are you sure?" "There can't be any mistakes. As long as there's no problem with the sample you provided, it's basically confirmed." Fu Bo couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. In the end, they couldn't be bothered to play games anymore. Uncle Fu carried Chu Xiaobao back to the Gu family in a hurry and immediately asked about Gu Jinglian's whereabouts. His subordinate reported that Gu Jinglian had just left to survey the territory. The Gus intended to invest in a piece of land to build a financial center. That piece of land was what Gu Jinglian had liked previously. He had bought it through an auction. The area wasn't particularly prosperous, but the rail transportation was very convenient. In the future, when it was developed into a financial street, it would have great prospects. Did old Master say when he'll be back? That person shook his head. No, old Master didn't say anything. Uncle Fu frowned and carried Xiao Bao to the seat beside him. He paced back and forth a few times and suddenly asked, you've been following old Master all this time. Have you ever found out what kind of women he has around him? I looked at him in a daze. He obviously didn't understand why he had thrown this question out of the blue. Uncle Fu, why are you suddenly asking this? There's a reason why I'm asking you this. You just have to answer. He said doubtfully. It doesn't seem appropriate to discuss old Master's private matters in private, right? Old Master hates this the most. If he finds out that I'm talking too much, wouldn't it be? Don't worry. Just say it. You don't have to worry about what happens after that. He rubbed his chin and recalled. Then he sighed helplessly. Old Master has a lot of women around him. He said. Uncle Fu didn't give up and asked, how many are close to him? Not many. He shrugged and said calmly, Master has many women around him, but he doesn't have a close relationship with any of them. Most of it happened in one night. Uncle Fu, you know it too. Master didn't care about women at all. Even if he had a lot of women, it was just a biological need. He's a man after all. Moreover, you also know that old Master doesn't believe in marriage. He said that he won't marry. Therefore, his marriage has always been a sore point for the entire family. Aren't there any special exceptions? He shook his head. No. Fu Bo sighed. He felt that he couldn't make sense of the situation. He glanced at his expression, but tactfully did not ask further. An hour later, Gu Jinglian actually came back. He went to investigate the scene and saw that there were no major problems, so he went back home. As soon as he returned to the Gu family, the first question he asked was, Did you send that brat back? However, his subordinate reported that Uncle Fu had just brought that little fellow back to the Gu family. Call that old man over. Gu Jinglian felt a wave of annoyance in his heart. He casually pulled at his collar and went upstairs. Uncle Fu hurried to the study. Gu Jinglian went straight to the point and questioned him. Why did you bring that brat back again? Chapter 2757. The police station verified it again. They used your hair and the blood samples collected from Xiao Bao Chu for a paternity test. The final report showed that you and Chu Xiao Bao are related. What? Gu Jinglian found it hard to accept such a conclusion. He stood up in shock and stared at him with a gloomy expression. Where did you get the hair? On your pillow. The doctor said that, fortunately, there were hair follicles left in your hair. Therefore, such a test report is valid. Gu Jinglian's expression froze for a moment. He frowned slightly. Don't joke about such things. Old Master, how could I joke about such things? Uncle Fu said with an aggrieved expression. The truth is right in front of us. From the first time I saw this child, I had some suspicions. Old Master, didn't you notice? This child looks a lot like you. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility of some kind of coincidence. However, this child's facial features are not only similar to yours. Even the expression he sometimes shows is extremely similar to yours. What confirmed my suspicions was the news from the police station that day. They collected Xiao Baochu's DNA and compared it with the national gene pool. In the end, the only match that matched him was you. What? Gu Jinglian felt that this was simply a fantasy. There were countless jaw-dropping coincidences in the world, but it was hard to imagine that such a coincidence would fall on his head. So, Xiao Baochu was his child? How could it be? No matter what kind of relationship he had with the women, he would always take strict precautions. He did not like children. In fact, it could even be said that he was sick of them. He would never let any woman have the chance to bear his child. Even if there was a fish that escaped the net, those greedy women who were pregnant with his child would definitely come knocking on his door with great fanfare. In the name of the child, they would use any means necessary to demand an astronomical amount of child support. How could they hide in such a small city with the child and secretly raise the child until he was 5 years old without alerting the Gu family? Ridiculous. Nonsense, Uncle Fu sighed. Master, there are some things that you can't deny even if you don't admit it. Chu Xiao, thou must be your flesh and blood. Gu Jinglian suddenly looked at him deeply, then curled his lips coldly, and said, This report doesn't count if I'm not present, unless you do it again, and I see the results with my own eyes. Only then will I believe you. Uncle Fu said, Master, if you want, you can go to the hospital for a detailed test right away. Before he could finish, there was a small movement at the door. Gu Jinglian sensed that someone was eavesdropping at the door. He shouted coldly, Who's at the door? A tender voice came from the door. Chu Xiao Bao stood at the door with an aggrieved expression. He nervously pinched the corner of his clothes. Just now, he had secretly followed behind Uncle Fu. He didn't dare to go in, so he hid at the door and eavesdropped. However, he couldn't understand what they were talking about. She could vaguely hear that this annoying bad uncle seemed to be yelling at Uncle Fu. Chapter 2758. Gu Jinglian saw his guilty look and frowned. Why are you hiding at the door? Chu Xiao Bao stammered for a while and suddenly said, Don't blame Uncle. I'll definitely return the money he used to buy clothes for me when I grow up and earn money. What did he mean? Gu Jinglian was baffled by her words. Uncle Fu's heart warmed. So this little guy was worried that he would be scolded by old master for spending money on him. So he secretly followed him. Although there was some misunderstanding, this child's kindness still warmed his heart. Gu Jinglian was a little impatient, but for some reason, he couldn't help but take a few more glances at this little guy. He saw him standing there with a wronged and indignant expression, pinching the corner of his shirt and looking at him uneasily. Suddenly, he sat back at the table and waved at him. Come here. What? Come here. Xiao Bao was a little shocked. This bad uncle was calling him, but he looked so fierce. Was he going to scold him? With such a fearful heart, Xiao Bao didn't dare to move forward for a while. Uncle Fu saw that he seemed to be very afraid of Gu Jinglian and smiled helplessly. Then he said, Xiao Bao, Uncle is calling you over. But don't be afraid. I'm here, aren't I? Uncle Fu encouraged him. Xiao Bao bit his lip. Then he mustered up his courage and slowly walked over to Gu Jinglian. He stood still and lowered his head guiltily, not even daring to look at him. Gu Jinglian scrutinized him carefully, from his eyebrows to his small nose and exquisite facial features. He looked at every detail carefully. He couldn't help but reach out his hand. However, before he could touch him, his sudden movement startled the little guy. Xiao Bao saw him suddenly reach out his hand from the corner of his eye and thought that this bad uncle was going to hit him. He was so frightened that he immediately hugged his head and squatted on the ground, crying out loud, Don't hit me. Gu Jinglian's lips instantly twitched. Who wanted to hit him? Why did this little guy become so timid? In the beginning, he had been wandering alone in the wilderness for so long, but he had never seen him cry. He had even been so bold as to climb into his car. Why had he become so timid now? He had only reached out his hand, and he had already been scared to this extent. Uncle Fu wanted to laugh, but his heart ached at the same time. It was probably because of Gu Jinglian's harsh words that night that the little guy was scared out of his wits. Hence, when he stood in front of Gu Jinglian, he could not help but feel paranoid and jittery. "Xiao Bao, be good. Uncle isn't going to hit you." Xiao Bao raised his head. There were still a few drops of tears on his face. Seeing that Gu Jinglian was staring at him coldly, as if he really didn't want to hit him and didn't look as fierce as he remembered, Xiao Bao stood up, trembling all over, but his shoulders were still trembling. "Uncle, you said not to hit me," the little guy said, sobbingly. Gu Jinglian took a deep breath to calm his emotions. He deliberately eased his tone and said lightly, "Come here, let Uncle take a good look at you." Xiao Bao was a little unwilling. Uncle Fu saw this and gently pushed him from behind. Only then did Xiao Bao pout and walk in front of Gu Jinglian. He raised his head but didn't dare to look into his eyes. Chapter 27:59. Gu Jinglian looked at him up close and reached out his hand. His slender fingers slowly caressed every inch of his facial features. His fingertips gently rubbed his brows and eyes, and he couldn't help but stare blankly. He hadn't looked at him seriously before, but now that he was looking at him up close, he suddenly realized that it was no wonder that Uncle Fu was suspicious. This child did look like him when he was young, but his child? Was it possible? Then, who was his mother? "Uncle, why do you keep staring at me?" Xiao Bao tilted his head and asked, puzzled. Gu Jinglian was silent. Behind him, Uncle Fu smiled and said, "Xiao Bao, haven't you always said that you want to find your father?" Xiao Bao turned around and exchanged glances with Uncle Fu. He nodded vigorously. "Yeah, Xiao Bao didn't have a father since he was young. Mommy doesn't know where Daddy is either, but Mommy said that Xiao Bao has a father. It's just that they were temporarily separated for some reason. Xiao Bao has always wanted to find his father." Uncle Fu asked deliberately, "If you really find your father, are you willing to acknowledge him?" Yes. Xiao Bao nodded vigorously. "If I can find my father, of course I'm willing to acknowledge him. Because he's my father. Without my father, there wouldn't be a Xiao Bao." Uncle Fu smiled in relief. He walked forward and picked him up. Then he gestured. "Xiao Bao, Uncle will tell you a secret, okay?" "Okay." Xiao Bao went forward. Uncle Fu leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Your father is right in front of you." "What do you mean?" Xiao Bao couldn't wrap his head around it for a while. Uncle Fu gestured with his eyes. "This uncle is your father." The afternoon sun was glaring and vicious. Even though it was only April, the weather was gradually turning hot. There seemed to be no transition between winter and summer as it quietly arrived without warning. Mu Yanqing and his entourage arrived in the capital. According to the clues and coordinates provided by Luo Qing, they quickly found the exact location. Just as the clues provided by them were, there was indeed a very well-hidden industrial area in the suburbs. This industrial area was built in the last century. They found the warehouse, and when they walked over, they saw breadcrumbs and broken chairs scattered on the ground. Chuho walked over and squatted on the ground. She gently rubbed the breadcrumbs. She walked over to the broken chair and looked at it. The chair was made of solid wood. After years of being exposed to the wind and sun, many parts of the warehouse were already moldy and decayed. It could be easily broken with a gentle twist. Luo Qing said that the warehouse is very humid, so they used a chair to tie Baby Chu up. "From the looks of it, it should be here," she said. Chuho frowned and said slowly, "But Xiao Bao isn't here. Where could he have gone? Could Song Enya have brought him back?" Meng Qingxue asked worriedly. "Impossible," Mu Yanqing said. "Since this child isn't the one she wants, she won't take the risk to bring him back. After all, it won't do her any good to harm a child. She won't do anything to Xiao Bao. A woman like her is ruthless. What won't she do?" Meng Qingxue said hatefully.